All right, thank you, Jim, and welcome everybody. My name is Jaap Vos. As Jim said, I'm the director of the School of Urban and Regional Planning. And I was asked to introduce our two co-moderators. And before I do so, I want to focus your attention to some of the maps that we put on the wall there, or actually on the glass. Those are maps that show some of the things that are going on in downtown Fort Lauderdale. Were actually done by a group of undergraduate students. I hope you look at it. They were in the lab printing them out this morning at 2 o'clock, and they had some printing issues. But I think they're really interesting maps, and the intent of these maps was to show you what is really going on in downtown. So it shows things like taxable value, different kind of uses, and some of the development that has been going on in the downtown and when it started. So I think it's worth your time to look at these maps. I think they're really well done. They're very interesting. With that, I have which I always think is an kind of awkward task of introducing the co-moderators, and usually what you end up doing is reading a bio. So if you're interested in doing that, I would suggest you go to the web. I always find it kind of annoying when people do that. So what I want to do instead is give you my thoughts about these two people. I was actually, Ken is a little scared now. He's like, oh my God, this can't be good. It's all good, Ken. It doesn't happen very often that I have to introduce two people that I actually admire. Now, usually you have a panel and there's at least 3 or 4 people on that you really don't care about. But this time, it's actually really an honor to be able to introduce Ken Yeang and Bernard Zyscovich. It's an honor because, to me, when I think about why do I admire these people, I always ask my students, why do you admire someone? Look at people you admire and then think about the qualities that they have. Well, they both have very successful design and architecture firms. But they haven't given up on their ideals and their dreams. And when you talk with both of them, they really have ideas. They really have their own ideas about how the world should look, what places should be all about, and they're very passionate about it. And I think having a successful business and still being able to hold on to those ideas is quite remarkable. They're both from totally different sides of the world, but they both really deeply care about place. They both really care about how places are connected to each other and how buildings and areas are connected to the larger ecosystems. So I think it's really quite remarkable. The other thing that I thought was really interesting is they're both excellent educators. I've seen Ken Yeang actually work with a couple of students in the School of Architecture and how he tries to teach these students how to think differently. I've seen Bernard. Bernard teaches in the School of Urban and Regional Planning. It's absolutely amazing. It's actually his whole firm now teaches. But it's quite amazing to see how he teaches and how he loves to tell students the things that he knows and tries to make them think about different things. And then there's one quality that I realized they both have that is so rare but so important. I realized they both have the ability to really listen. I remember the first class that I sat with Bernard, and they were going around the room, and all the students were saying things. And Bernard was just sitting back, and he was listening to them. And then he responded to them, and he actually really took it seriously. And the same, I think, with Ken Yeang. When I saw him listening to the architecture students and to their ideas, they really have the ability to listen and to figure out what it is that people are saying, and then give them some really constructive thoughts about it. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce Ken Yeang and Bernard Zyscovich.
Once you sit there.
Okay.
Well, you go first, Bernard.
Oh, I've been instructed to go first. You listen well. I did. First of all, thank you for that wonderful introduction. It sure beats reading a bio. And I guess my thoughts are that, in one sense, teaching here over this past year and now with the process of being involved with FAU, I'm in complete admiration for what's happening at the school, first of all, because I think it's a fabulous way of an effort that's really, I think, just at the beginning stages of integrating architecture and urban design. In a way, that's been my passion, so it's been easy for me to deal with that because of the fact that I was trained as an architect, and during my architectural practice, I was basically trained to also be looking at urban design at Pratt, where I went to school. And I realized that they're inseparable. And I think that a lot of what's happening here in the school and what this conference is about sustainability. And my passion has been that I want to keep reminding people that character, personality, and authenticity are really valuable and rare elements in the creation of a place. And that it seems to me sometimes that the planning direction is really headed more toward a homogeneity as opposed to an individuality. And I'm a real believer in individuality. I think that's what makes places special. I think that's what makes places have the character that becomes the draw by which economics and good design and good placemaking start. So from that point of view, I think it's wonderful to be here and to be talking about the vision of the future of Fort Lauderdale, because Fort Lauderdale is a place comprised of many very special and unique places. And as we look at things from, as we say, 30,000 feet, you don't really see the finer grain or the aspects of a place that people come out in droves to fight against development or fight against change, because I think they're really basically driven by fear. And as we begin to look at how we create a sense of place, it's really important to talk about what we have and what has value and focus on how we can enhance that value, because as I tell people when I used to have to defend my projects that were high-rises, by example, I said I've actually never met anyone that didn't like the Chrysler Building. I've met a whole lot of people that don't like certain very tall buildings. It's not because of the fact that they're tall so much, it's because they're inappropriate scaled for the place, it's that they don't really have a lot of attention to detail, it may be many different things. So I don't believe that one size fits all. I think that we really need to have our plans and our places come from within and then develop that way. So we need to find what's unique and authentic about the place and then build the plan around that, and then make sure that our codes and our regulations are reflective of what's special about the place and not just applied from some pattern book, which is a very popular concept. Because I think that basically those concepts will end up destroying what we have that's special. And I really believe in the quality of design. I think we should encourage innovation. So all these elements in our society as we see them, and they're all around us, they're constantly pounding on us to become believers in very simple statements like pedestrian friendly or traffic calming or any of these other thoughts. And then there's a proliferation of solutions that get strewn about without regard for where they land. And I think that that's a very dangerous place to be. So having said that, how do you deal with process of people coming and being involved, which they have every reason to be and every right to be in their own communities? How do you really begin to look at ways of conducting public workshops? How do you deal with ways of establishing citizen input in a way that doesn't take away from the opportunities? Because people, in my experience, basically don't like change. They like status quo because they're afraid of change, because change to them means that they might lose something. So as a profession, how do we begin to talk about the potential and the excitement of gaining something? The growth of this country, like every other country, I'm down in Colombia a lot now working on a new airport project, and I'm struck by the enthusiasm and excitement of people building their city all over again with this idea that change is going to be something fantastic because it's going to create this great improvement in the quality of their lives. And I think that we've become kind of dour. We don't feel that change necessarily is going to be an improvement. And I think part of that is because by the time you give credence to all the possible things that couldn't go wrong, you don't really have a lot of hope left. and that's really the point of view that I have, which is that, as Jaap said, I'm proud to be an idealist. I like talking about possibilities. I like infusing conversations with hope and potential, because I think that in any situation, we can either go this way or that way, and why not go in the direction of potential and possibility instead of the potential of the other direction, which has a lot of negativity associated with it. I don't think we should be blind to problems. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that there's a kind of flow that isn't in a hopeful direction. And I think that this conference and the potential visioning of the city is a really fabulous thing to be talking about, as long as we're talking about it in the context of how can we make ourselves greater, how can we fulfill our own destiny, how can we talk about the possibilities in a positive way. And that's really the focus that I think we should bring to every effort that we make.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm delighted to be here. I became an ecologist as well as an architect several years back, and so my view of the world really is slightly askew. Once you become an ecologist, you see the world totally different. You see yourself as just one species out of multitude of other species in nature, and that every species in the eyes of nature has the right to survive as much as we do. But of course there are many other problems in the world, like poverty, unemployment, lack of sanitation and so forth. But I contend that a clean environment is important, because if you don't have a clean environment, then solving all these other problems become even more difficult. So, having clean water, clean land, clean air is a starting point for all communities. I first came to Florida, or Fort Lauderdale, about 30 years ago, I think in the mid-'80s. My father used to belong to the evangelical church in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we drove all the way down from Daytona, St. Augustine, down to Fort Lauderdale. And at that time, this was a totally different place. We had this beach house, and we went swimming every other day. It was wonderful. When I come here, it is built up, full of high-rises. So it's a totally different place. And I think now's the right time to think about the vision for the city. And that's very important, because visioning is what most businesses and most cities should do once in a while, to remind us that there is a future. Because visioning means determining where you want to go. And if you don't know where you want to go, then you don't have a future, you only have a tomorrow. So having a future is very important. I spent a lot of time designing high-rises too, and I see a lot of high-rises here in Fort Lauderdale, which wasn't here 30 years ago. Reminds me of the time when I met the Duke of Gloucester. I had this idea several years back that we should design high-rises like cities in the sky. And high-rises have a bad reputation, because most high-rises are nothing more than just concrete trays, homogeneous concrete trays, stacked one on top of each other. And I thought that was a really demeaning way of living and demeaning way of working. Whereas when you work on the ground plane, everything's pleasurable. It's much easier to make contact with people. It's easier to go from one place to another place. And so I had this idea that we should design buildings like cities in the sky, and we should design high-rises as vertical urban design. Then all of a sudden, all the aspects of urban design, placemaking that my colleague talks about, making communities, vistas, figure ground relationships, connections, you begin to ask yourself, what is placemaking in the sky? What is making connections in the sky? What is vistas in the sky? What is figure ground relationships in the sky? What is making communities in the sky? And all of a sudden you have a whole world of new opportunities for design. And so I call this the vertical theory of urban design. I wrote a book about this. I call it Rethinking the Skyscraper, a vertical theory of urban design. So around the time when I just finished writing that book, the British Council gave a lunch, and the guest of honor was the Duke of Gloucester, who's a cousin to the Queen of England. And Duke of Gloucester is an architect. He used to have a busy practice with Ben Darbyshire and Ben Thompson, but he retired as an architect after, I think, his brother died from a car accident, and he took on his royal official duties and stopped being an architect. And so because he was an architect and I was an architect, they sat me next to him. And I said I had just written this book, Rethinking the Skyscraper, Vertical Theory of Urban Design. And I said to His Royal Highness the Duke of Gloucester, I said, Your Royal Highness, can I present you with my latest book? So I picked it up and says, Vertical Theory of Urban Design. And I said, can that remind you of my definition of dancing? And I said, Your Royal Highness, what is your definition of dancing? And he said, dancing is for me the vertical expression of horizontal desires. And I thought that's exactly what architecture should be. We should design our tall buildings as an expression of everything that we find pleasurable with the ground plane up in the sky, not as demeaning concrete trays, one stacked on top of each other. And so that has been the basis for a lot of my work, and that we should try and design buildings not as places, as spaces in the sky, but places in the sky. Places with almost like a representation of everything that we find pleasurable in the ground plane. In the ground plane, we have multiple access systems. We should have multiple elevators, not just two-zone elevators or one zone, but maybe secondary systems, tertiary systems, and quaternary systems. We should have places, not everything at the ground floor, at the podium, but up in the sky, places in the sky, the squares in the sky, all the things that we find in the ground, the pub, the gallery, the retail, the shops. We should have them in the sky as well, halfway up or three-quarters of the way up. So, and schools in the sky, playgrounds in the sky, and it's possible. But architects don't do it because they follow the advice of engineers. Engineers say that, it's much more economical and much more structurally simple to structurally more efficient to have the same structure going all the way up. And so we should really rethink the way we design tall buildings. We should rethink the way we design buildings per se. But I think my idea about tall buildings is not just about places in the sky, but it's about introducing ecology in the sky, and that in nature everything's connected. There should be ecological nexus. And what we as human beings do before we occupy the land is that we chop it up. We chop it up with roads, we chop it up with drains, with sewage, and that we fragment the land. But nature is connected. And once we fragment the land, biodiversity goes down, and that the survivability of the remaining pieces of green is very low because the species are reduced, and that is grossly ecologically simplified. And so what we need to do on the ground plane is to reconnect as much of the greenery as possible, and to create a new ecosystem. In fact, we should design our cities like artificial ecosystems. Everything that we learn from nature, we should try and reinterpret it in our cities. But back to this high-rise, if we were to connect the greenery in the ground plane, then we should bring it continuously up in the sky as well, so that then the building is not just a structure which is plonked upon the ground, but it becomes integral with the ground plane. That we should see buildings as landscape, and we should see landscape as buildings. And that becomes a different way of looking at architecture. And I hope that you consider these in your revisioning of your city. It is a wonderful city, it's a beautiful city. And what struck me most about your School of Architecture, and that I've been here only for the first time a couple of weeks ago, is its dynamism, the wish to do things quickly, efficiently, and amazing agility. I attended student presentations in the morning, then we went for lunch, then after lunch, the faculty had worked out totally what to do next. I was just amazed. And I said, this is excellence in teaching at its best. And so there seems to be great potential here that I haven't seen anywhere else. I've spoken at over 20 schools of architecture in the U.S., and this is the first one that I've come across which has this level of dynamism. Others are sort of stuck in bureaucracy. There are a lot of inter-fighting between the faculty, some total dominance by the head of school. And so, but not here. This is a wonderful place. I have great aspirations and great hopes for what you're going to do. And I hope you extend this all the way to your visioning, your visioning for your city.
Thank you. I think
Good.
move forward and introduce the, I guess one by one, the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay. Sure.
And, again, you may want to come back over here.
Sure, I'll do that.
Sure. And you, well, it's my job to do these introductions. I don't really have an awful lot of information, and I hope that I can do the appropriate intro. But one thing that I know is that the variety of the people speaking are really appropriate for the topic. And to begin with, there's Greg Stewart, who I do happen to know well, and have enjoyed working together with him when we were working together here in Fort Lauderdale on the Broward County campus plan. We had this idea that with all the holdings that are existent within the downtown, wouldn't it be interesting if we could look at them all together instead of one by one, and see what could be done with all of the holdings that the county has in the downtown as a way of creating an impetus for redevelopment. Unfortunately, like so many things, it got kind of bogged down. But nevertheless, one of the most wonderful aspects of it is that I got to spend a lot of time with Greg, and I'm really happy to be able to introduce him in his new role as executive director for the MPO. And I think that what Greg is going to be talking about is transportation and related land use in terms of Fort Lauderdale's future. He's leading the MPO in the development of the 2035 long-range plan, which gives special attention to transit, housing, and development. Welcome, Greg, please. Are we going to introduce everybody, or? I think we'll do one at a time. Okay, I'm going to move out of your way.
I think I'm going to be over here because I actually have a PowerPoint and it goes on for about 38 slides, but they're fairly quick.
He's talking quick.
There we go. So the blank screen, basically, we have. Picture, if you will. Envision. So I represent the Broward Metropolitan Planning Organization. For those of you who don't know what that is, we are actually a federally mandated, state-chartered, independent entity that basically does planning for transportation. But beyond that, we actually place federal dollars, the gas tax money that you get every time you put gas in your car, goes up to Washington, D.C., comes back by formula, and we assign where that money goes. So whether it's $1.5 billion that's being done on 595 or $75 million to go forward with the Downtown Wave, a streetcar project many of you might have heard about, those monies have to pass through my 19-member board. And having a 19-member board of all elected officials is more than herding cats. So real quickly, and Dr. Gassman's going to get into this conversation in a little bit, but I want to actually show you some charts, and you can kind of see how the trend lines went down. We have transportation actually having some of the largest, as well as electrical power, gas emissions that we have down, nationally and internationally. You can see the drop-off. That was basically because of the recession. If you look at greenhouse gas generators by particular uses, it's 33% goes to passenger cars, 27% goes to light truck. So majority of this is what the roadway issues are, and this is stuff that we are facing here as being in South Florida. The President of the United States set up a very ambitious goal, bringing gas mileage of our vehicles up to 35 miles to a gallon and dropping the CO2 emissions. We'll see how we do with that. This is one slide we added into this PowerPoint, and just if you look at how this is actually looking, Sao Paulo actually has one of the lowest greenhouse gas emissions per capita in generation. But this is something I've always theorized, and now we have scientific fact. Washington, D.C. is the greatest gas producer that we have. You look at our local conditions, this is Florida. Florida, it's a beautiful place. I had the luxury of growing up here. My parents came down here when they were young. My grandparents also came here. Even though my family migrated from Greece, the important thing is that they always came to Florida. And Florida is one of the most beautiful places I can imagine. And I never understood that until I lived elsewhere, because it's flat, it has wetlands, and they really didn't look like much when I was a kid. But spending time in Boston, spending time in New York, spending time in Los Angeles, going back to Greece, and then coming back to Florida, I understood its beauty. And if you look at how we're surrounded by water, the impacts of sea level rise, which Dr. Gassman is going to talk about, is actually very important to us. But as a transportation agency, the impacts of the water, the way the water is going to rise as it does, we are going to face a very interesting future. Our 5 million people, Greater Fort Lauderdale is much larger than just Fort Lauderdale proper. And I know Mayor Seiler basically had made mention, and there was an article in Florida Trend recently where it talked about Lauderhill and Hollywood and Tamarack and Pembroke Pines. But in the 1.7 million people that are on the borders of Broward, we also have another 2.5 million people that are in Miami-Dade and 1.5 million up in Palm Beach. We have a lot of people down here. 400,000 of our residents every morning wake up and go into Miami-Dade County. 200,000 of our residents in Broward wake up every morning and go into Palm Beach. That's just typically a vehicular movement. If you look at how we developed, and I shamelessly stole this from Anthony Abate, he basically came up with this slide presentation. So we can kind of see where our urban populations were based on our waterways back in 1790, 1895, 1915, 1924, 1930, 1940, 1951. You actually start seeing the urban population growing. 65. I look at this picture from 1960, Gulf Ocean Mile. This is a Fort Lauderdale area just to the north on A1A, so hopefully you all have a chance to go up there. But 12 short years later, this is what it looked like. So to understand the growth that we were going through during that time period, and I got to get the great experience of watching this, I got to play in a lot of the construction sites. If you look at how that development actually happened, our forefathers back in that time, in 1972, all the leaders, the political leaders, the business community said, oh, you know what, if we keep growing at this rate, we need to have a plan. So in 1972, the Area Planning Board, a precursor to the MPO, developed a transportation and land use systems plan. That I actually found on the bookshelf here at the library next door on the 5th floor in dust. And I was like, oh, this is fascinating. We need to get this and look at it. Well, in 72, they came up with 2 possible land use scenarios. One with dense urban centers, where Coral Springs and Plantation and Davie and Pembroke Pines and Hollywood actually had density, buildings in the sky. And that's really what they were talking about, and keeping land uses around those areas, you know, once you get past that, low. Well, they also came up with another scenario. Guess which one they chose? This one shows a spreading of density and population throughout the county, a low density in the southwest portion because they believed the soils wouldn't actually be able to handle the type of housing that would be built out there, but they did come up with a solution. Ironically, let's see what happened over the time. So here we are in 1970, here we are in 1980, here we are in 1990, 2002. We made that plan work, didn't we? So that second option is basically the blueprint for the way Broward County, Greater Fort Lauderdale, actually developed. Now, there were several things in this plan that did not occur. There was a mass transit system that was proposed, going east-west, south of the great Interstate 595 that we're putting $1.5 billion into today. There was another transit system talked about doing rail on the Florida East Coast Railroad and actually moving passengers north and south. There was also a proposal to do mass transit, a rail system on University Drive, which is to the west, one of the most western roads, going north-south and dropping into Miami-Dade County, where they recognized would be one of the largest employment centers in the region. Our land use, and we look at this future land use map, but realistically, this is what got built here. You can see the red being commercial, the yellow being low density. All of this exists today on the ground. One of the other fun factors about Broward County and our region is the number of different entities responsible for different parts of what we are supposed to do. The bottom, if you look at the base, you have a South Florida Regional Planning Council. That covers 2 counties. You have a Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. That covers all the other counties. You have all the different service providers, BCT, MDT, PalmTran, every name, every acronym you can imagine for that. You move up to a Regional Transit Authority. Above that, a Turnpike Enterprise. You can keep going up and up and up until we get to the 31 cities that make Broward County, which Fort Lauderdale is only one. So if we look at how the region is, our board, my elected officials yesterday, said, what is wrong with us? We need to be able to unify some things. We need to be able to collapse some of these boundaries. Our board has a vision, and I think one of our introducers has actually talked about having that vision and where are you going to go and what is that blueprint for tomorrow. Our elected board, my Council of Governments, basically said they want to transform the way Fort Lauderdale, Broward County exists, emphasizing mass transit. I think I heard that in '72. Promote economic vitality, actually protecting the environment and enhancing the quality of life. Well, everybody always says those words. But they did adopt a long-range plan. That long-range plan you see here is about $6.2 billion. That plan is cost feasible. When we were working with our consultants, this is based on what we believe our revenue generated by gas tax will actually be during this planning time frame. So we went to the feds and said, this is what we think we will be able to build. That is actually a bus system. And we can't do rail. I need to double that number to get to rail. So this is what's financially feasible. If you look at what we're talking about in high-capacity transit, it's those red lines on the map. This is buses operating in dedicated lanes. It's straightening out the multiple bus operators that we have here and saying, these are the routes that will actually produce. And then your community shuttles connect to these particular routes that go in east, west, and north-south direction. Bus rapid transit, many of our other communities have this in the area and around the country and around the world, and it's actually buses operating in mixed traffic with signalization priorities. You know, they can press a button and get through the traffic light and get to the next, queue jumping technologies. All of these things we can afford to do based on what the money we have today and what we're projecting. One of the other things that we actually tied, and our board was very vocal about this, is how you now tie this proposed transportation system to a land use network, understanding what is being built and what can be built in our community. A lot of these circles, these mobility hubs, the larger gateway hubs, are actually CRAs, where land use has already been assigned. We don't have to go through the political harangue. We don't have to go through and say, we need to increase the density here. The I don't want this in my backyard folks have already had the discussion, and it's concluded. So at $8.2 million, in 5 more minutes, okay, $8.2 million we actually have for these particular hubs. We are going to be able to leverage that with private investment in these hubs to build the picture that you see there. And really, a mobility hub isn't a great big building. It's a bunch of uses stuck together, webbed into the fabric of the community. Our second tier is anchor hubs, which are not as large as the gateway, but there's more money tied to that. $2 million. Buy down in parking costs, buy down in streetscape costs, buy down in the infrastructure costs necessary to create that sense of place so we don't look just like everywhere else in the United States. And then obviously to the smallest of models, it's a $60,000 investment. This is a local stop where you'd actually be able to get onto your community shuttles to get onto the larger routes. So if I encourage you to go to our website, it's under construction, but there's still operational links. We have a very interactive site on livability planning, which is one of the hallmarks of what this Metropolitan Planning Organization is doing with our transportation dollars. And you'd be able to understand what a gateway hub actually is. You look at public safety. There's just every one of those things have opportunities. Now let's drill down a little bit further into specific projects that we are bringing forward, that we are going to be coming back to the citizens of Broward, Palm Beach, and Miami-Dade and saying this is something that is necessary to move your future. That rail system that I was talking about along Dixie Highway, basically the FEC tracks earlier, that was recommended in 1972, if you see there the larger photo, that is actually what we are now proposing. We are going to go through with environmental studies. We believe we can get at least portions of this underway and actually operating within the next 5 years. The larger system itself will probably take us some more time. Then we also have the downtown streetcar. And I say this because it's been talked about for a while. But we're ready to go to the Federal Transit Administration next month. We are submitting this application saying, here is something that we can do today. We're expecting this project to be under construction by 2014. And then there's the larger collaboration of other projects that we're working on, whether it's the Central Broward East-West. By the way, that's a 1972 plan that was recommended running under 595 or the Port Everglades Expressway. We also have Oakland Park Boulevard, as well as Broward Boulevard corridors, where we're actually going to start implementing the transit, the bus system that was recommended in that vision. This East-West project that I was talking about ties in to the WAVE project in downtown. So it's an integrated system, similar cars, similar uses, so that way there isn't maintenance fee issues. We're not all starting to go, you go this way, I go that way, and one day we'll meet together. This integrated system will eventually tie downtown Fort Lauderdale, not just to its hospital, but to the airport, down past the seaport, back to Tri-Rail that goes north-south, and out to another university called Nova Southeastern. The educational complex actually has a medical school out there. So we'll be able to not only move our citizenry, but the students that need to go between this campus and the Nova Southeastern campus without having them to get into a vehicle or a car or even one of our buses. And then you look at a bus rapid transit system that goes from Nova Southeastern out to one of our largest entertainment venues, which is the Bank Atlantic Center. That actually will then provide people from that location to get to different parts of Broward, Miami-Dade, and Palm Beach. And with that, this is where we're headed with our transportation efforts. I look forward to the next presentation by Ms. Gassman, Dr. Gassman, and I'm going to stand down and hopefully we'll have great comments later. Thanks.
Our next presenter is Dr. Nancy Gassman. She's the Natural Resources Administrator for Broward County. She's going to talk about impacts of climate change, specifically in this location. Dr. Gassman received her PhD from the UM, studying impacts on coastal ecosystems. Her main focus now is Broward County and supporting the county's climate change task force and assisting the South Florida Regional Climate Change Compact. Please welcome Dr. Gassman.
Well, I've been fascinated by listening to the discussion so far, and it's the first thing that strikes me is that Mr. Yang's comments about people being a species among many species on the Earth. And for the American portion of that species, we represent 5% of the human population, but we use generate 28% of the greenhouse gases that are impacting our environment today. And to comment on what Greg was saying, he showed you a note about how nationally transportation makes up 27% of the carbon footprint in the United States. However, locally in Broward County, transportation makes up 45% of the carbon emissions that are coming from our community. And in Fort Lauderdale, that number is actually 55%. So we love our cars, don't we? So what I'm going to talk about today is a little more general. I'm missing a slide here, but that's okay. There's been a number of people and events that have changed the way that our community has developed. Henry Flagler brought in this incredible railroad system, which, by the way, he put on the highest part of the land. And that'll be important a little bit later in my talk. There were people like Napoleon Bonaparte Broward, who our county is named after, and he was trying to figure out how to drain the land to allow the human species to settle in this area and get rid of all of those alligators and all that pesky sawgrass. And then, of course, Hurricane Andrew completely changed the way we think about building codes and our own personal safety in this location. But looking forward, I think the greatest agent of change that we are going to see in our community is that of climate change. Our community in 2100 is going to look very different than it did today in 2011, but also you need to think about that our community, as Greg clearly showed, even 50 years ago, didn't look anything like it does today. And so change is really an everyday part of our lives, even though we have this ideal that we want to cling to the status quo. And it's going to take very careful coordination and planning in order to get us to a point where we can sustain our economy, protect our community, and continue to hold on to that ideal and that sense of place that we have here in the South Florida area. One of the key sort of terms that we've heard is global warming, and global warming is giving way to the idea of climate change in general. By 2100, we're expected to see between a 2 and a 10 degree increase in the global temperature average. Since the mid-1970s, the average global temperature has increased by 1 full degree. And that might not sound a lot, but if you think about it, the difference between having ice and not having ice is 1 degree. The current rate of warming is about 3 degrees for 100 years. And the 8 warmest years in recorded history have occurred since the year 2001. Specifically in Fort Lauderdale, the hottest June through August in recorded history happened last summer. 38 nights were above 80 degrees, so that even at the coolest part of the day, we were experiencing some of the warmest weather we've ever had. And in the last 20 years, we have set records for the coolest temperature, the highest coolest temperature. So the hottest part of the day, the coolest part of the day was hotter than any time in the last century, and we set records for 183 days in just the last 20 years. What that translates to in our future is that currently we experience about 60 days a year that exceed 90 degrees. In just another 60 years or so, we're going to be looking at more than half of the days of the year we're going to hit over 90 degrees. Based on the current projections, based on our current use of greenhouse gas and fossil fuels. So Fort Lauderdale is a hot place in so many ways. Miami Beach is a hot place in so many ways. It's going to be hotter in a whole new way in the future. But we're also looking at, again, this transition between the idea of global warming and climate change, because climate change is really about changing the way our climate works and coming into an era of what I would describe as climate instability. You may recall last winter, about this time, we had significantly below average temperatures for the June through March time frame, something in the range of between 4 and 6 degrees lower than normal. And if you flip that on its head and say, what if your summer was 4 to 6 degrees higher than normal? You start to get a sense of just how dramatic this can be. In Palm Beach, they had 12 straight days of weather below 50 degrees during this time frame. But extreme weather and climate instability also includes precipitation. In December of 2009, we had an event in the Hollywood Hallandale area where we saw 8 to 16 inches of rainfall in just over a 24-hour period. Those blue areas are about 8 inches. The blue areas here are just about 8 inches, and when you get into this red, it's up to 16 inches. And as Greg mentioned, this is a very flat place. And because of it, we do not have the kind of ability to move stormwater off our land when we get 16 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. And a lot of people were caught off guard. So in addition to extreme rain, our climate instability is also going to lend us to this idea of extreme droughts. Wetter wets, drier dries. And this is from February 8th, 2011. Wait, that's just a month ago. We're currently experiencing an extreme drought in our area, when I just showed you that less than a year ago we had this crazy rain. And that drought is spreading down through the East Coast as we are not seeing the normal precipitation for our area for this particular dry season. And if you think about our wet and dry season, which is different than anybody that experiences in the normal, in a northern climate, here we have a wet season and a dry season. We get 60% of our rain in the wet season, 30% of our rain in the dry season. We're not seeing that at this point in time. Another thing that's changing is it's one thing for us to have to move and adapt to these changes, but the natural system also has to move and adapt to these changes. In 1990, if any of you that garden in the South Florida area, you're in zone 10. And you know that because there's lots of plants you want to plant that you knew when you lived in New York or Minnesota or Wyoming, and you want to plant them down here and you can't because we're in a subtropical zone. Well, in 1990, that subtropical zone came up to just about Lake Okeechobee. In 2006, the subtropical zone had moved dramatically. And it's not just for us in South Florida that it has moved so dramatically, but if you look up into Georgia, their plant hardiness zone came about halfway through the state, and now it's almost completely to the edge of the state. And with those changes also come this idea that the subtropical plant or your palm tree can now live in Lake Okeechobee where it couldn't before, but suddenly it's getting these extreme cold weather, so it establishes itself, it grows, it's warmer there, and then it dies because an extreme cold event happens and that tree is no longer there. And because of that, we're also seeing a whole influx of exotic pest species that we never had here before. They couldn't exist here before because it wasn't quite warm enough, and now it is warm enough for them to exist here, and we're seeing them come in and devastate the natural landscape. And we're seeing all sorts of new species that never could have lived here deciding that they like South Florida too, and they're going to stay. Well, hurricanes is another thing that we in South Florida have also come to live with. And the current thought process relative to hurricanes in our future is that there's some good news and there's some bad news. The good news is that the expectation is that the storm frequency is going to go down, and it's going to go down somewhere between 6 to 34% globally in terms of what we can expect for hurricanes. But the bad news is that the intensity is going to come up. So instead of having a Category 2, we might instead have a Category 3 hurricane, and the intensity is expected to increase somewhere between 2 and 11%. And again, for South Florida, because we are flat and we have challenges with stormwater runoff, the stormwater-related rainfall is one of those predictors that we really need to pay attention to. And the prediction is that we're going to see a 20% rise in the precipitation related to hurricanes within 100 kilometers of the storm center. So that's a dramatic increase in the rainfall. Let's talk about sea level rise. Sea level rise happens because glaciers melt. When water is hot, it expands, and that we're seeing this global warming trend that's causing both of these things to occur. Currently, there's a group called the South Florida Regional Climate Change Compact, and they have agreed that they're going to use this particular projection for their planning purposes. And the projection shows that down here in the blue, we've seen between 8 and 10 inches of sea level rise at the Key West tidal station, which is one of the oldest tidal stations in the country. And that if sea level continued to rise at this rate, by the year 2060, we'd be looking at somewhere around another half a foot. It's 50 years, half a foot. But the expectation with climate change is that we're going to see an acceleration of the warming. We're going to see an acceleration in glacial melt. We're going to see an acceleration in sea level rise. So what we're expecting is that somewhere around 2040, we have the possibility of a 1 foot sea level rise. That's 30 years from now. And by 2060, there's the possibility of having a 2 foot sea level rise. So within this century, we're looking at the potential for between 3 and 5 feet of sea level rise by the year 2100. Our community cannot look the same under those kinds of sea level rise regimes. And if you look at a map of the Fort Lauderdale area, which is strictly, this map is strictly based on our current elevations and on predicting what will happen with sea level rise at mean high water, what you can see is that in the red areas, that's what a 3-foot sea level rise would be inundating into these various areas. The purple is the 1 foot, and the yellow is the 2 foot. And at this point, you're right here. This is downtown, where downtown Fort Lauderdale is on this map. And what you can see is that there are lots of yellow and red identified areas in our downtown area. So we're going to need to start making plans to adapt the downtown area as well as many areas in the coastal community to this sea level rise, which could occur, again, 1 foot by about the year 2040, 2 foot is possible by the year 2060. And sea level rise has many implications for our community. We drink groundwater. We depend on groundwater for our drinking water source. Salt water, as sea level rises, is going to intrude into our well fields. We already know that we have challenges with an 8-inch rain. What if we have a 1-foot sea level rise? Beach erosion is a major concern, along with the impacts to public and private properties that are located in our coastal zone. And our beach is very important because it drives part of our major portion of our economy, the tourist economy. There also are expected to be impacts to our coral reefs, not only from sea level rise, but due to something called ocean acidification. The pH of the ocean is rising, and that impacts not only the corals, but all the associated flora and fauna that live on the coral reefs. And there also is going to be an impact to the Everglades system. But we're not talking about what's going to happen 40 years from now, 60 years from now. We're already experiencing the impacts of sea level rise. And that's because every fall we have extreme high tides that are related to the position of the moon and the sun, and they're called perigean tides. And this picture is from Miami Beach in October, where we had a perigean tide which was causing the tides to be between 8 and 10 inches above normal high tide. And it completely flooded the Alton Road for several days, but not continuously. The high tide came in, the street flooded, the high tide went out, the street cleared. Somewhere around rush hour, the street flooded again, and then it went away. And that happened over a course of about a 4-day period. But it happened over a course of a 4-day period in September and October and November. This is an area in Fort Lauderdale, and the top picture is a home under construction. The next picture is an established neighborhood showing you a storm grate, and then another is part of what makes Fort Lauderdale and our area so idyllic, a home on an ocean access canal. During our high tide event, this is what those same areas look like. The home under construction, there was very little access to that home because the streets completely flooded. This storm drain allowed the tide to come up and into this street and flooded this home, not into the home, but close to the home. And then this wonderful idyllic backyard the pool was going to become part of the canal in another couple inches. And you have to ask yourself, well, this is just a high tide. It only happens a couple times a year. How many times a year would you like your home to be flooded? Everybody raise your hand who'd like their home to be flooded 1 time a year. And so you can see that our opportunities for adapting to sea level rise and climate change has to start occurring now. Because even if these effects only happen 1 time a year, it's more than many of our citizens can tolerate if that 1 additional inch is what takes you over the threshold of the home and brings the water into your living room. Mr. Zyscovich talked a little bit about this idea of the positive aspects of change. And if we do nothing, if we stand by and do absolutely nothing, we are not going to be the community that we want to be in the future. And that we have to embrace this change now so that we don't experience the negative aspects of not taking action. We need to look forward to what are the positive opportunities that are associated with changing our environment and changing our community now, while we have an opportunity to do so. In the next 100 years, we're going to experience warmer weather and colder weather. We're going to experience wetter weather and drier weather. The ocean, which enhances our quality of life at this time, is going to threaten our economic engines. It's going to threaten our existing way of life. And so as a community, we need to drastically reduce our carbon footprints, and we need to be very active in planning to address those aspects of climate change that are inevitable, that we can't stop just by changing the way that we use fossil fuels. Otherwise, we are going to have a very difficult time becoming a climate resilient community. So we need to take action now. And with that, I will end my talk.
Thank you. That was great. I think what we need to make sure that Greg knows is that when you do your BRT line, you need to raise the elevation. Our next speaker is Mr. Bob Swindell, President and CEO of the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance. He's going to talk about economic opportunities. Bob was named the CEO of the Alliance in 2009. The Alliance is Broward County's official public-private partnership, bringing together all of the business community with local government for the purposes of economic growth. Bob, in his career as a business owner, he's been an angel investor and has been involved with numerous charitable and governmental service positions. Please welcome Mr. Bob Swindell.
Good morning and thank you. If you're like me, you're wondering what I'm doing here. When Tony Abate, who's a dear and longtime friend, approached me about presenting this morning, he asked me to sort of position from an economic context how we view sustainability and from the business community and what we're trying to drive in South Florida. Greg mentioned earlier in his talk about this Florida Trend article. If you haven't seen it, I'd encourage you to get it. It's got a phenomenal 30-page profile about Greater Fort Lauderdale and really talks about the economic strength. It's got a great intro. The picture's phenomenal. As you were driving in today to come to this event, you probably were like me thinking that, well, this is part of why we live here. It's a beautiful day outside. But I think we've come to realize that we can't live in our beauty alone from an economic standpoint either. You know, you've got to have some depth and you've got to have a diverse economy and a knowledge-based economy that can help support the lifestyle. Where you live is like a lot of things, it's supply and demand, and we are a highly desirable location, which causes a competition for available space, which drives up price, which makes it a not an inexpensive place to live. What the Alliance's role in the community is to bring together both our business and our policymakers and talking about, you know, what we envision the future of Greater Fort Lauderdale being. It was mentioned earlier that you know, it's about a lot more than just Broward County. I mean, I think the number the mayor mentioned this morning at the breakfast that Jim referred to was 1.8 million with the latest population figures. When you look at South Florida as a region, and there are those that say the region is just not. I'm sorry. Okay, can you hear me better now? So, you know, the region, as we call South Florida, is a lot more than just the 3 southern counties. You know, the region that we talk about now goes all the way up in Indian River County. So now you're looking at a much larger area. Over 7 million residents occupy this area. And how do we work together? We looked at transportation issues, but on the economic development side, how do we work together as a region to promote this great place to live? You know, one of the things that we find interesting, you know, I've been involved in economic development for about 8 years. And the mantra used to be, and the philosophy was, you recruit the companies to your community and the jobs will follow. And that paradigm has changed since I've been doing economic development. About 5 years ago, the discussion came more about, if you have the workforce, the companies will come to you. And I'll give you one brief example of that we've seen in Broward County and Greater Fort Lauderdale. About 2 years ago, one of our major employers, Motorola, has been here a long time, over 30 years. They have a 16-acre campus out in Plantation, one of the nodes that Greg mentioned from a development perspective. 16 acres, they have 1 million square feet under roof at Sunrise Boulevard and University Drive. And they've been an employer in this community for a long time. Have had upwards of 3,000 to 4,000 employees at different points in the company's history here. Now they're down to about 1,800 employees. But about 2 years ago, an interesting event happened. They laid off 200 engineers and their support staff. And the engineers were from a particular technology line they were developing. It wasn't based on performance or anything else or atrophy. It was actually they cut those jobs. Well, what that created was a readily available pool of talented employees, workers. And literally a week after I found out about that, before it hit the press, the people that were affected by this were actually communicating with friends in this industry, in the mobile and the wireless communications technology industry, saying, hey, I need to find a job. And one of the challenges that we had with Motorola was when they were recruiting people, it was the only game in town. So you came down here to work for Motorola, you moved your family here, and for whatever reason, if that job did not work out, you didn't have a whole lot of other choices. You could either try to start your own business, or you could migrate somewhere else with your family to go to work for a technology company that was in the field that you had chosen to practice. Well, with this layoff, we were immediately contacted by 3 significant companies, the first of which was General Dynamics. And they have a wireless communications division called C4 Systems that's based out in Arizona. The second call came from Research in Motion. Any of you that have Blackberries are familiar with Research in Motion. And the third call came from a company called Foxconn, which is the company that designs and builds the hardware for the iPhone, iPad, the Apple devices that some of us, like myself, use. All 3 of those companies came into this market because the workforce was here. I'd love to say that the Alliance had a phenomenal marketing piece and just persuaded them that this is where they needed to be, but it was the workforce that brought them here. Now, why I think that's important going forward, and the story actually has a happy ending. So what started as a 200-job layoff is a net new job gain by the end of this year, from 2008 to the end of this year. Over 2,000 people, new jobs in that wireless communications cluster, are now in Broward County. And again, those employees work, as Greg mentioned, we've got the migration patterns. Several of those employees live in Miami-Dade or Palm Beach and migrate to Broward. But that's a significant growth in that particular industry. Now, part of my job is to promote that fact and to communicate to people around the world that, that this cluster is growing and thriving in Broward County. Now, the next part of that equation, and where we look visioning down the road, is what the experts tell us now when they talk to seniors at colleges and universities about their future plans. And the common coin of the realm for that is millennials. And they talk to millennials and say, well, what are your job growth prospects? What are you thinking of doing? And the majority of millennials that HR placement people talk to, the college placement offices talk to, their response is, I'm going to choose where I want to live, and then I will find a job. Now, if you're like, my perspective on that was entirely different in college. It was, I'll find the job, and that's where I'm going to end up living. So a totally different way that people are looking at their future career prospects. And what's driving where they want to choose to live? Well, if you talk to Richard Florida, who wrote the book Rise of the Creative Class, and now he's written a couple more past that, and the second one was A Flight of the Creative Class. He's got some interesting things that he looks at. And now Richard Florida would tell you what drives a creative economy, what brings people with intellectual capacity to your community are 4 things. And he calls it the 4 T's. He actually added the 4th T in his latest book. And he's very fond of South Florida, which is, I think, a good thing for us. The first T is talent. If you've got a good workforce, you've got a good educational pipeline, so you've got good universities, a good educational system that's grooming a good workforce for future business growth. That's one requirement. The second T is technology. So do you have access to high-speed internet? Do you have access to those things that drive technology companies and bring innovative companies to your community? The third T, interestingly enough, is tolerance. What's your community like? And part of what he based his research on is he looked at Seattle and said, why have these technology companies thrived in the northwest of the United States, a place that was not really considered a technology hub prior to that? And what he found was it was as unique as the grunge movement, and the tolerance that Seattle had and that part of the country had for different ways of approaching life and business and how you wanted to live your life. And that tolerance was a very attractive quality that brought people to that community, that had intellectual capacity, that had other skills that helped that industry thrive there. Now, the fourth T that he has just added is what he calls territorial assets. And he thinks that South Florida, in addition to having those other three T's and strong levels, we have a phenomenal territory here that we call home. Now, from a design perspective, and what we hope you leave behind with us, our thoughts on how we accommodate a great place to live with the industries that accommodate a waterborne lifestyle. You know, we want to be a clean environment. We want clean technology to be here. But we also are dependent on our legacy industries. And while we're trying to diversify from those, and that's part of what the Alliance does, we will always have tourism. Now, those are service jobs for the most part, not high-skill, high-wage jobs. So they directly contradict what I mentioned when I started, that this is not an inexpensive place to live. So you've got to have that diversity in the economy. But tourism will always be an important part of what we do, and it should be. We're a beautiful place to live. We have a great fun brand as a community. When we go out and talk to business people about location decisions, and we ask them, well, would you refer, would you recommend a project come to Greater Fort Lauderdale or South Florida in general? More often than not, they don't know the business case for that. They say, you know, you've got a great fun brand. A lot of people still think that people just retire here. But, you know, do you really do business down there? So as you notice from the Florida Trend article, you know, we promote our skyline a lot. And I think the comments earlier about, you know, high-rise living and creating that environment, those things you find on the horizontal plane, on the vertical plane, I think is critically important as we move ahead. You know, what I've found over the years with the business community is that there's a strong desire, you know, the leaders that are here, the Mike Jacksons of this world that lead AutoNation, have a great deal of pride, and he's a recent relocation to South Florida, but he has tremendous pride in this community and tells his business colleagues when he's on business programs like Bloomberg in the morning on Squawk Box and things like that, he's very, very positive and very supportive of Greater Fort Lauderdale as a place to live, work, and play. And he reminds his colleagues that, you know, you can build a strong business in South Florida. The talent is here. The quality of life brings people here. You can attract people. When we talked to the scientists at Scripps about attracting people to South Florida, was it a tough sell because we're not known as a life sciences hub? And they said it was easier than they expected because it was not that life sciences hub, but it was a great quality of life. So you were able to bring some talented people to South Florida. Well, I think moving forward, we've got to find ways to handle some of the challenges. I mean, the very sobering presentations we heard this morning about how we deal with changes in our climate. You know, we've got some interesting challenges just in Broward County. You know, we talk about phenomenal mass transit opportunities, and I'm a big believer in transit-oriented development. So try to get those clusters close to where the transit corridors are so you've got the density to support that transportation. But we've got some interesting challenges here. You know, we've got a high water table. So you can't put a great subway system in. I was just in Barcelona. The metro and the tram system there, I rarely took a cab. I would get from the hotel to the convention area, back and forth. Very easy, very intuitive system. But South Florida's got a challenge in that. We can't actually bury the rail. Another thing we've got is one of our legacy industries is marine industries. We have an active waterway in downtown Fort Lauderdale, the New River. Marine industries is a huge job provider here, a huge part of our local economy. Well, if you think about it, if they tell you that in mass transit, I think the maximum waiting time people will wait for the next bus, the next tram, the next rail car is about 7 to 10 minutes. 8 minutes, I think, is considered sort of the maximum. So when you have a light rail train going over our working river, do you have a bridge going up every 7 to 8 minutes? I mean, that's going to be a challenge. Do you build a huge bridge over the river? So you have to start maybe Davie Boulevard and it ends at Sistrunk to accommodate that. Now, these are design challenges that I don't have the answers to, but I'm hoping that you do. You know, we want to make sure that we have a collaborative mix between business and the industries that are here, take care of our newcomers that are coming to the area, provide good jobs for the people that grew up here and go away to school or go to school here and realize that there's good opportunities to stay here and raise a family in this community. One of the challenges that Motorola was telling me when I was out talking to them a couple weeks ago was when they hire people now, they look for people that have a tie to South Florida of some sort. Because what they find is when they have people that relocate here from another part of the country, After 6 years, they have a great time, and they're fresh outs. They've just graduated from college. But when it comes to raising a family, they question if this is the place that they should do that. So we need to build that reputation of our community, that we have that connectiveness as a community. I think when we compare ourselves to other communities, we bring business people down, Broward is perceived as having a very cohesive population and community. There's not a lot of competition. It was touched on earlier with our university system. I mean, I have no problem and never have any resistance when we're working with a company and they want to know about educational resources. We will have Florida Atlantic University, we'll have Nova Southeastern University and Broward College and University of Miami, if that's necessary, all at the same table and willing to work together and talk to a business about what their programs will deliver from a workforce perspective. So we have that cohesiveness here. So we've got a lot of strengths working for us, but we do have some serious challenges. I know, like you probably have questions for the other speakers. I'll end it there, but again, thank you for your time today, and we look forward to a lasting legacy that you can leave Greater Fort Lauderdale.
Interesting that we have transportation, natural resources, and economy as the kind of lead-in. My sense of Fort Lauderdale and South Florida in general, because we always talk about them together, it reminds me, by example, of an idea that I've had swimming in my head for quite a long time, which is when you go to the south of France, you don't say you're going to Nice. You don't say you're going to Marseille. You say you're going to the south of France. And I think that one of the natural opportunities that we've had here is that we have the water that connects all the counties. We have possibly one of the best bays in the world, Biscayne, to be a boater in. If you fall over, you don't die, like you would in other parts of the world. So I guess my question, maybe for Greg, is the transportation, I mean, maybe it's a question for all the speakers, is how do we begin to change the mindset that we all live with, which is very parochial in terms of our sense of where we come from, and begin to really truly begin to think of ourselves as a region, because we call ourselves regional transit authority or, regional planning authority, but the reality is that we all compete with each other, and the chart that Greg put up showing all the different entities, agencies, counties, municipalities, it's no wonder that, and this is kind of like Babel in a way. It's really a very difficult place to work. It's a hard place to build any consensus. So my question is, considering all of the environmental issues that are going to affect all the counties, considering the economics, Bob, of what you're doing, the Beacon Council, the different chambers, the transit connectivity, do you have thoughts on how we can begin to change the mindset that would enable us to really act more as a collaborative instead of a competitive set of people? Who would like to begin?
I can start. We can move this way.
That sounds great.
Just actually, I'm going to plug this for a second. You basically might have seen this on your chair. If you go to the second page and you look at the message from our chair, she talks about regionalism. Mayor Armstrong from Plantation, who unfortunately retired yesterday, our board has the vision of one place, one system, one understanding. We become one unified Southeast Florida community. And building that into all of us, whether you call yourselves Greater Fort Lauderdale, Broward, Miami-Dade, or Palm Beach. I have relatives in Cutler Bay. I have relatives in Jupiter. And we're all South Floridians. And until we start identifying ourselves as this one place, that's where this difficulty has been. This Tower of Babel we have built for ourselves is because we were a bunch of different little cities at one time. When I was a child, there was actually trees between Fort Lauderdale and Pompano, and between Pompano and Deerfield, and between Deerfield and Boca Raton. There was actually a reason why each place was unique. But that changed, and that changed because of that rapid growth. So I always like to liken ourselves as a teenager. We've gotten to the point where we're 18. We're being kicked out of the house now. It's time for us to grow up and figure out what we're going to be. So what is that choice that we're going to make? And that choice is facing us square in the eyes today. It's how does this place go to that next level? How do we keep the technology folks that we have here? Because, you know, Microsoft actually has their headquarters for South and Latin America by our office, by where I work. RIM Technologies, Qualcomm, all the folks that were here. We actually had a place out in Sunrise that was a company from England called Raquel Milgo. There are all these industries that are willing to move to South Florida. They're willing to come here. They're willing to stay. But as Bob pointed out, a lot of people that don't have roots here, they come down, they have a great time, and they move away. I've lived in my house 10 years. In the last 10 years, all of my neighbors have turned over. That's a significant statement when you start thinking about that. So how do we start promoting this as being a place where we want to live? It's the positive direction, no longer just the negative. We can't say, oh, it's the end of the world, we've had a hurricane. We've had 5 hurricanes this year. Why would you want to come here? We need to start actually telling people, not only can we have hurricanes, but we can survive them. When our streets flood, we need to be able to say, I know how to fix this problem. And we can do it. We can adapt. So to build this place, my nieces and nephews, they don't want to move away. I actually wanted to move away when I was a child, and I did. I came back here because I understood the wisdom of my parents, why they thought this was so beautiful. My nieces and nephews all want to live in downtown Miami. Bernard built and designed incredible buildings in downtown Miami that everybody said were going to sit there and be vacant. It was the second most number of skyscrapers under construction next to Dubai. They're filled now, and they're filling. And the end of the world didn't happen. The market didn't completely bottom out. We can do better, and we can make this our place, but we all have to have a clear and consistent message. So somebody like Bob, even with Nancy, her presentations, need to end on a happy note. We need to be able to say, we can get past this. We just have to figure our way to adapt. So that's my message. It's one place, one society. This is one area. We need to be able to understand and grasp that.
Relative to the climate change issue and the climate change message, in October of 2009, the elected officials from the 4-county area got together in a leadership summit to talk about climate change issues facing our community. And recognizing that we've got 5.5 million people in the South Florida area, you might not think about it this way, but that's more population than 30 states in the Union. Each of our various county governments are, for Broward County has more population than 10 states in the Union. Collectively, we have a very strong voice, and we have to start using that voice. And part of that leadership summit in '09 was to say, what are we going to do as a region? Because if Miami-Dade adapts and Broward doesn't, it's not going to do us any good. We are all connected. Our geology is the same. We need to start thinking about regional solutions. So in January of 2010, the 4-county climate compact was signed and ratified. And the idea there was that we would work as a region to start thinking about how to mitigate climate change and greenhouse gases as a region, and also to start looking at what our adaptation options were, because they're going to be similar across those 4 counties. And climate change adaptation is not something that's going to happen nationally. It happens locally. You have to adapt for the issues that are happening for you where you live, because in Montana they're not going to take extreme measures to adapt to sea level rise. But we must. And so we need to start working together. And I think that the mayor of Broward County, Susan Gunsberger, they had a retreat recently with all the commissioners to say, what's your critical issue and vision for the future? And she listed as her priority that we need to start thinking regionally, and that regionalism was a critical priority for Broward County government to start considering. I think one of the terms that came up here just a moment ago was the idea of competition. Yes, the Port of Miami competes with Fort Lauderdale, and the Miami-Dade, the Miami airport competes with the Fort Lauderdale airport. There's always going to be competition. And with 105 municipalities in the 4-county area, yes, 105 municipalities in a 4-county area, there's always going to be competitions at different levels. But we have to put aspects of that competition aside so that we can work together to come to common solutions. And one of the lines in the compact specifically says we will put our issues aside and we will not compete in these issues that we need to think about regionally. And so I think that from both an environmental standpoint and from a policy standpoint specific to climate change, that the 4-county areas are starting to come together as a region to consider what their options are and how they can work together and take advantage of their collective expertise and resources to ensure that we can adapt and become a climate resilient community.
From the business perspective, and I won't do well if I have to bend down that far. Changing the mindset to regionalism, I think it's one of those things that when it finally becomes recognized in the public that we are doing this, thinking regionally, it'll have already been done for a few years, and I think that's what's happening now. I think Greg's talked about it from a transportation perspective. You can't stop a bus line at the Miami-Dade line when you've got people trying to go to work in downtown Miami or some other place in Miami. I think from our natural resources, water and the access to clean water is going to be a key issue for South Florida, and we've got communities right now that can't bring in new business because they don't have the water resources. They've all been pledged. So that's a real issue that we're going to have to deal with as well. So I think we're looking at things like clean water and access to water as a regional issue. From the business perspective, I showed this brochure a little bit earlier. It's more than just a brochure. It shows a mindset. This was a collaborative effort of myself, my counterpart from the Beacon Council, Frank Nero, and our counterpart in Palm Beach County, Kelly Smallridge. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to present South Florida as the destination. And this is what all three of us use when we market South Florida and we travel internationally. We now have it in 4 languages as well as an 8-minute DVD that really describes the impact of South Florida. Another example that I would touch on from a regional standpoint is we have this life sciences corridor that we're trying to figure out what we're going to do with. So not only do Frank, Kelly, and I get together on a regular time frame to talk about this, but we also have President Shalala from the University of Miami, Chancellor Ferraro from Nova Southeastern University, President Saunders from FAU, the president of FIU, the president of several of the local colleges, all getting together on every 2 to 3 months, saying how do we develop this life sciences corridor, and can you have a cluster that encompasses, it could be 4 counties, it goes all the way really up into St. Lucie County. Is that too large, or is that compact enough with today's technology that can really be a cluster that you can brand? Palm Beach County in particular and St. Lucie have made significant investments in these life science, bioscience companies like Scripps, Max Planck, the Mann Institute, Torrey Pines. They're all residing in primarily in Palm Beach and St. Lucie counties. But how do we create this cluster? Is it too large? And I don't know the answer to that. The last thing I would say with the transportation is, one of the challenges we've got, and the big question in my mind, is can we really adapt to mass transit in a tropical climate? And I don't know the answer to that. Can you as designers create pedestrian canopies that will allow me to leave my home, walk to a station, and I live 10 minutes from downtown. I could easily use mass transit on days I don't have to travel around the county. But can I do it dressed like this? And those are the realities that we have to deal with. One of our mayors, I see Mayor Seiler in the back, but one of his predecessors on the Fort Lauderdale Commission was really trying to get away from this whole tie thing, and maybe he has a point. Maybe we need to change that mindset a little bit. But I'll leave it at that.
Okay, well, I think that launches us. Do we have any questions from the audience? Anyone? Go ahead. You.
Identify yourself.
Is that? Oh, there we go. My name's. Oh, identify myself. Yeah. My name's Barry Benjamin. I work for a nonprofit that my brother started called Third Planet. One of the things that I think that, I don't know, I seem to have missed is that each one of the panelists have talked in a way that involves systems thinking within their own issue, but have not seemed to been able to talk about their issue across the issues, using systems thinking across each one of the different issues. And as an example, I'd like to point out the fact that when you talk about South Florida, you're really talking about Southeast Florida. And there's a whole other side of our state that can call themselves South Florida too. And one of the great advantages we have is that each side of our state borders one of the most amazing natural resources anywhere in the world. And in fact, it's unique. And that's called the Everglades. And we have a resource of probably the greatest amount of surface water in the world as a resource for fresh water for all of the people that are living here in South Florida. And it would be nice to hear each one of the panelists involve their issues, talking about how we can use all of the resources and stuff that they bring to the table across all of the different perspectives that they're bringing to the table instead of just in one linear vertical way. Thank you.
Dr. Gassman?
Well, in terms of, I'm assuming you're pointing me out as the environmental person, and I'll jump in and say how climate change sort of covers all of those issues, as you mentioned. The Regional Climate Compact is about to convene 3 work groups to start a regional discussion to develop a regional climate action plan. And those 3 groups, the first work group is called Lands and Natural Systems, which will be looking at how aspects of land use will need to accommodate climate change across the region, so that, for example, if key deer need to find a new location for the key deer, that they could consider lands in Palm Beach, for example, or that we need to consider that there may be a lot of climate change refugees coming from the Caribbean into South Florida as their homes are no longer habitable as sea level rises, and that we need to start thinking about how we accommodate those communities in our region. Another one is called the Built Environment, and they will be taking on issues of building systems and transportation-oriented design and some of these other design issues across the region. And then there's a third group that's just going to be looking at transportation to start talking about how we can adapt the region's transportation issues to deal with climate change in general. So the Regional Climate Change Compact will be taking on all those issues and will be crossing all the lines that we just discussed. In addition to that, the South Florida Regional Planning Council, working with the Treasure Coast, has recently received a significant grant from EPA and HUD to look at sustainability across not the 4-county area, but the 7-county area up through the St. Lucie area and Brevard County. So we're now looking at what we've described as as you've described, Southeast Florida. The 7-county coastal region is going to be working together to develop a sustainability plan, and their first focus will be economy and housing and other aspects of sustainability. So it's not that we may each be sitting here talking about our own areas of expertise, but that kind of integration and coordination is happening.
Thank you. We have time for 2 or 3 more questions.
Thank you. First, your comments were wonderful in your speeches. I really appreciate them. My name is Tim Smith, and I'm the chairman of Fort Lauderdale's Visioning Committee. So I thought I'd give a quick update that we are moving ahead. If you look at it in government terms, with lightning speed, if you're in the private market, I think mud is kind of the best expression. But we are moving ahead. I thought I'd ask a question as a former city commissioner in Fort Lauderdale and now the chairman of the Visioning Committee. I think our city has always been kind of schizophrenic in a way. We are kind of a young community. Some of our citizens were born here and think the community has moved too fast and it's too crowded and too populated and the streets are clogged up. Some people that have moved here want to kind of close the gate behind them and kind of keep all this beauty to ourselves. And then there are many others, I count myself among these, that think that Fort Lauderdale should be one of those great cities in America that everybody wants to come here to do. And then we'll need new amenities and new density in the downtown. So my question to the panelists, have we reached kind of this tipping point yet where the word is we're going to move ahead and be this greatest city, or we still have this schizophrenia going on about what people want to be in our future?
Well, that was the whole point of we're at 18. And an 18-year-old doesn't exactly know what you want to be yet, but you're kind of feeling it out. Most kids, they grow up, they think, oh, I want to be a fireman, and then all of a sudden they want to be this and they want to be that. Fort Lauderdale, Broward County, Southeast Florida. We're at that tipping point, yeah. The answer is what are we going to become? There's fear from people that have been here for generations because things change too fast. There's a change in our lifestyles that's occurring, whether it's how we get to our job in Palm Beach at Moss Ponk. There are different ways of how we have to think. We have people telling us the sea's going to come and overwhelm us. And I mean, that's all very well. But those are the realities. I mean, you have the end of the world people. There's so many different types. I mean, and that's what makes this a really great place. But until we recognize that we are that one place, and we recognize that downtown Fort Lauderdale is a great little community. It truly is. West Palm Beach, downtown, is a really interesting place to go and be. South Miami, areas that Bernard has worked on, I mean, there's really fascinating little villages, but we don't celebrate that. We don't celebrate that uniqueness and the whole point of us being that one place. In many, we are one. And that statement that's on all of our dollar bills is actually something that people need to understand until you, as a former elected official, and some of the other elected officials start saying that, and the business community, as Bob has said, is starting to say that, then people will start thinking differently. Until we do that, we're at that tipping point. Which way do we want to go?
And I don't want anyone to walk out of here that think that the message that I have sent you is either a Chicken Little message where the sky is not falling, nor is it tomorrow is realistic doom. The fact that we have the ability to predict to some degree what is coming and that we have time to make appropriate measures to adapt, that's the positive aspect of it. We recognize we're in a situation where we have to make some changes, and we have the time to make those changes, but we need the political will and the community understanding that these changes will be important for us to continue to be a viable and thriving community. So there's time, but we need to act.
I would just, add real briefly. It was a great question, Tim. I think that we do understand that our local resources are an important component of what makes us unique. We've got so many things that we're unique about, even on an international scale, that I aspire, and I know that a lot of my colleagues at the Alliance aspire for us to be a world-class international community, that we're looked at around the world as being unique. If you think about a couple of the things, one of the executives with Research in Motion is German-based, and he was here 6 or 8 months ago, and he said, Bob, do you realize what you have in Broward County is unique? And I said, I didn't know what he was talking about. I think we have a pretty unique place. He said, nowhere else in the world do you have the 4 leading companies doing wireless communications, technology, research, and development within 5 miles of each other. That's pretty impressive. We've got 2 universities on our coast when the previous question was about our natural resources and is that a driver? From a business perspective, you better believe it. We've got Nova Southeastern breaking ground on an international coral research facility, a $30 million investment that will be world-class, state-of-the-art, nothing like it in the globe, studying our corals. Right next door to that, you've got Florida Atlantic University with a nationally recognized energy production facility from energy from the ocean. And I didn't do the name right, but CTEC is looking at 3 different technologies, both turbine-based power generation from the Gulf Stream, temperature gradient thermal power generation, and then also manufacturing hydrogen offshore. I mean, those are unique things, and the Gulf Stream comes closer here to anywhere else in the continental United States. It's a unique natural resource, but it's something else that we're capitalizing from a business and a technology perspective.
I'd take a point of privilege. I'd like to weigh in on this too. I think it's a great question, and what strikes me is that we just went through probably the most phenomenal boom that we've gone through as a society, possibly forever in this region for sure. And it's interesting how different cities embraced or denied it. Miami, as Greg said, just went gangbusters. Fort Lauderdale, from my point of view, was had its foot on the brake. And in retrospect, you can think of all these years and you look around and you try to understand what really happened here that made a big change. And at least in the physical environment, it's kind of hard to point to too many things. And I think that that's really part of your tipping point question. I think there's a tipping point when people really feel that something significant has happened that has changed the paradigm, and now they're embracing the future. And I think that that's really the question for the visioning. Are we at the point where we're ready to embrace, or do we still have our foot on the brake? Because I think if we want to continue to have our foot on the brake in this community, that's going to impact significantly the vision. And the opposite is also true. And I think for me that's really the key question, because I've worked all throughout the whole region, and Fort Lauderdale has always been among those that are most reluctant to allow anything to actually happen. And I think that that's a very key issue for this community. Next question.
Bernard, I'm going to have to ask.
Great. We have a local practitioners panel. Dr. Len Berry, who's director of the Florida Center for Environmental Studies at FAU. And we have John Gara from the American Institute of Architects, the Fort Lauderdale chapter. We have Sandra Lee, who's the board director, and Robert Canelos, president of South Florida chapter US GBC Building Council, and Doug Smith from the managing partner of ETSA, and Mr. Tim Hernandez, principal of the New Urban Committee Corporation. I presume that each one of you is going to start, so maybe we should start with Dr. Len Berry, whose name is first on this list.
All right. I'll be fairly brief, but first addressing the issue of region. I think it was about 16 or 18 years ago, 3 of us in the university at FAU really had a set of interviews with the regional commissioners, not Monroe, but Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County, looking at ways in which they might operate as a region. I remember the Palm Beach County commissioner saying, I have 5 different regions in Palm Beach County, and that's my job. Broward was the most organized in a regional context. But when we tried to hold meetings, if we held them in Broward, Palm Beach came. If we held them in Miami, Broward came. But the other county never turned up. And we wrote a pamphlet, and it's still around somewhere. The whole thing is different now. The mental attitude is totally different. And I think as we move from county to region, I came here as provost at FAU, and the president told me, your first job is to solve the Broward problem. And the Broward problem was Broward wanted its own university, and FAU and FIU were fighting over who should have dominance in Broward. That's gone. Things have moved on in 20-odd years, and we have the universities cooperating and competing, but cooperating. We're looking at lots of ways in which we can get together. And we have the counties cooperating under the HUD grant, cooperating under the regional compact. And the attitude is there for building South Florida. We've got challenges. And Nancy's address outlined some of the things that we've all been working on together. And what hasn't been raised yet is the whole issue of what does those precipitation, sea level, and temperature changes mean? And for me, they mean a very sophisticated water management. And that as we move forward in urban design, managing our water systems probably in very different ways than we have now. How can we get community water systems that aren't dependent on Lake Okeechobee, aren't dependent on a salinizing water table? So water, I think, is one of the ways in which we solve some of our crises. Different kinds of water management, different kinds of water retention. And that hasn't been raised. The other thing that I think is missing from the discussion is the wonderful diversity of people that we have. We've talked about Europe, but Latin America, we have huge Brazilian community with bringing money and resources in. And as we look forward in a job sense and as an economic sense, we need to take great advantage of that diversity. I could say a lot more, but there you go.
Thanks very much, Dr. Berry. Our next commenter will be John Gara from the American Institute of Architects Fort Lauderdale chapter.
Hello. Working. I'd like to thank the speakers for bringing up some important issues for our region. I think that the issues of transportation, climate change, are all extremely important and kind of hit home with all of us. The AIA has done a lot of effort, has made a lot of effort to bring these issues to local and state government and to raise them to the table so that there's awareness and policy change can come about to help improve our region. But I think what's really important is to have public awareness and have the citizens become a part of this and show their support or not, but to hear back from them. And I think part of the discussion could be how can we bring this to each individual and hear their get their input. So that's what I'd like to hear more of.
Thanks very much, John. Now we hear from another two environmentalists, Sandra Lee Bodderich and Robert Canellos, president of the South Florida chapter of the U.S. Green Building Council.
Thank you so much. It's really inspiring to come and listen to all of these great ideas. I think it's so critical to look at things at a regional level. My academic background as a biologist and looking at ecological systems and working as an environmental planner and addressing sustainability issues. We have to do that at a regional level. You can't take an individual little community and entity. They can move forward with small things, but it is critical that we look at things at a regional level, and I'm really happy to hear that. We're smart people. We can figure out how to deal with our infrastructure, how to deal with many aspects of sea level rise, how to raise roads to keep them from flooding. But when we look forward and envision our future and envision a vibrant, resilient area, we also have to look at what is it like for me as an individual and where I live. What is my community like? I love the phrase of environmental nexus and looking at that aspect of it and what are our green spaces like in addition to looking at our tall buildings. It's really a critical matter also to look at what everybody's individual space is like. And when John mentioned getting the public input, that's critical, but you also have to remember most people are afraid of change. You have to really make it look as an opportunity for them. We were fortunate, Robert and I were both fortunate last night to listen to Mr. Siddiqui, who's the environmental director for the Office Depot Corporation, and talking about what initiatives they've moved forward with. And he talked about you don't need to push, what you need to do is pull. You need to put the opportunities out there so that people understand what they are and will be enticed by that. You can't really move people by guilt and fear and doom and gloom scenarios, and how he talked about fun and making things normal, making what it is that you want to do normal, not some abstract, some thing that you're going to try or as a trial. Make it the norm. That fun and normal are what the new guilt is, instead of using guilt to motivate people. And I was very inspired. It was wonderful to listen to their approach on things. But I think as we move forward with our visioning, we've got to also remember that ecological nexus and what it is for that individual that's going to be living and working here and supporting our economy. What's their lifestyle? We don't want to put them in stacked trays that are not sustainable and not where people want to live.
Yeah. So let me just expand on that. I'm Robert Canelos, President, USGBC South Florida Chapter, and Sandra is the chair of our Broward branch. We cover a vast territory with a lot of the issues that were brought up this morning. Our territory goes from Key West to Vero Beach, so we cover a lot of different ecosystems, a lot of different cultures, a lot of different population centers. And what Sandra and I have recently been on a tour presenting our LEAD neighborhood development program, which institutes smart growth. It's all the programs involved in the LEAD system, as well as connections to the neighborhood mass transportation, even to urban agriculture. And we're out there educating people. We get a lot of people that don't know how to institute those principles, don't have a specific project that would apply itself to that ND program that has a set of checklist goals, like anyone familiar with a LEAD project. But what we do is we encourage them to get into the program and read them and just institute them one by one into their planning and into their codes and resources, and not to just follow that. We're not telling people to just follow that. We say follow the principles that are easiest and get these principles involved in your local planning and get the obstructions out of the way. For instance, I have 6 projects right now in Broward County that are pursuing LEED certification. 5 of the 6 have instituted rainwater harvesting. And that is not always the easiest thing to do, but we have 10, 15, 20,000 gallon tanks built into these buildings that are saving enormous amounts of water. And then if you go through the typical LEED system, it's what we're doing is gauging and addressing performance after the fact, post-occupancy, how much water, how much energy we're saving. That's part of the newest LEED program. And we as the South Florida chapter are gathering information on how these buildings are performing, how much water they're saving, and how much energy they're saving. So we provide that service to the community. We're a not-for-profit. We have a huge volunteer army and 1,000 members in South Florida, and we are looking forward to working with everyone here at the table. And I was inspired this morning, so thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Then what we have now is Mr. Doug Smith, who's Managing Director of EDSA.
Thank you. Is that on? Okay. Well, the 3 presentations I thought were very informational and obviously very relevant to this visioning process. And it was a little bit of a roller coaster ride. I was really encouraged by Greg's report of the MPO and their activities and the advances in transit, which is so critical, I think, to our future here in this city and in this region. And it's something that's really hasn't happened in the way that it should. I thought it was interesting that he found a study from 1972 that envisioned this 40 years ago, and it has yet to happen, but hopefully in our near future we're on the right track, no pun intended there. And then, of course, a little bit of fear factor perhaps, from Nancy's presentation, but the brutal facts are what we're facing, and I think it was great to hear that we now know what we need to face, what we need to deal with in the near future. So, thank you, because those are important issues to our future as well, and our viability and sustainability. And then with Bob's comments, of course, the underpinning of our economy and jobs, and the fact that we do have a world-class setting here that we can attract people to and businesses to. So all those are very important. I wanted to also just reflect for a moment on the opening comments from both Ken and Bernard. Bernard said a few things that hit me in particular. He used the terms of like ideals, dreams, and passion, hope and potential. I jotted down a few. He talked about creating sense of place, building upon what is unique about a place, and then drawing out the character and identity and personality of a place. And I think as the city embarks on this visioning process, we can sort of look back at some recent history in Fort Lauderdale where those very things were addressed and accomplished. And what I'm referring to is a time in the early 80s when the city fathers here in Fort Lauderdale envisioned, or had a new vision, created a new vision for the future, and they said, we want to be the best city of our size by 1994. And they had the courage and fortitude to set forth some major public works projects. The community embraced those projects, and I'm really talking about the beach and Riverwalk here in Fort Lauderdale. And those are two major urban initiatives that really did change the quality of life, and I think the face of tourism and the economy here in Fort Lauderdale. So as we embark on, I think, this visioning process, we can look at the courage that it took to make those leaps of faith and how that changed this community, and the fact that there was follow-through and there was actually infrastructure put in place to make those happen. And so I think that's an important part of how do we get there, how do we accomplish the next sort of renaissance of this city. And then to some of Ken's comments, which I really appreciated, about starting with environment as the essence of the underpinning of everything we need to look at, and sort of connecting the urban fabric back to a larger environmental fabric as well. And I think green belts and what we have that's very unique to Fort Lauderdale, what I call blue belts, the waterway systems that we have that are highly unique. If we can get all of those things connected and connected into the development and urban fabric that we're really trying to create, I think we could do a better job with parks and streetscapes, and we could really enhance our waterways and utilize those more effectively. So just a few comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Now we have Tim Hernandez.
Thanks. I'm an urban planner. I used to be a planning director in the Chicago area, and then I became a developer. And so as an urban planner, I look at things from a long-term perspective, patient. As a developer, as a planner, you're idealistic. As a developer, you got to be pragmatic. You're impatient. You want to see things happen fast. One of the things that I noticed about South Florida, Jim Worley and I have talked about this, and others in this room, over the last 20 years, is that when you compare South Florida to maybe a Chicago or a Boston, I mean, Chicago, it's a concentric city physically. Okay, I mean, it's kind of a half circle, and all roads, literally and figuratively, lead to the downtown. It's not the case here. We have West Palm, we have Fort Lauderdale, we have Miami. That's more than schizophrenic. I mean, you have people, who really not only don't care, but really don't understand what's going on in a region that's not even as large as Chicago, for example. That's an enormous challenge that we have to succeed. I look at what Greg is talking about, and look at some of the issues that Nancy brought up, and Mr. Swindell. I mean, the economic, natural resources, and transportation issues in this region are enormous. But it's almost like there's three parallel universes going on. You know, as much as we try, as much as we talk about how we need to think more globally, more regionally, I don't think we've really done to this day a very good job of it. I think the biggest common interest in South Florida, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the Miami Dolphins. Okay? I don't think there's one other thing, that one other entity where that you could get the three people in the three counties to agree that they all, you know, they can agree on what to do, or that they would agree to support in the same way as the Dolphins, Marlins, or the Heat. So to me, you know, Greg and his counterparts in the different counties, they have a huge challenge. Okay, when you're talking about the transit, it's great that we're trying to figure out how to get transit down 595. Okay, but to me, what we have to do, whoever mentioned about 400,000 people going to Dade and 200,000 people going to Palm Beach every day, that's it. That is what this is all about. There was an article in USA Today, I think, on Monday. It was about, there's a new book by a Tufts author, I think, or Tulane professor, called Sunburnt Cities. And he's basically saying that in the next 20 years, you know, all these Sunbelt cities, we got one advantage. We do have, you know, whether it's 3 or 4 degrees hotter or colder, we have the climate advantage over the northern cities. We have a chance to remake our metropolitan areas and not follow the path of Detroit, Buffalo, Cleveland, Newark. Okay, we can do something different. And we should be thinking about that on a much, much more broad scale than I think what we're really doing. I mean, I think the results are disappointing when you look at the sheer auto dependence that we have in this region compared to those places. I mean, way smaller percentage ridership in mass transit, way more auto dependence than in those places. There's frankly no reason for it. I mean, yeah, it's hot outside at the bus stops, but we do a horrible job of making it convenient for people to use transit. It's, you know, it doesn't come often enough, and it doesn't take you where you want to go. And so, big surprise, nobody uses it. So, I mean, you know, you look at that, you look at, my wife is a great example. She runs the state of Florida for a Silicon Valley Fortune 100 company, NetApp, okay? She runs it out of our house. She's got 20 employees across the state. We live in Fort Lauderdale. It's easy for her to get to Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa, you know, on Southwest. And she runs the state, you know, and there's probably hundreds of people like her that are doing the same thing for companies all across the state. The Generation X employee, all the research shows, they don't really want to live and work in a suburban business park. Okay, they like a more exciting environment to live in. Those people that are the Generation Xers, you know, if you didn't watch The Social Network, you know, those are the guys who are running the companies. Okay, they don't want to work out in the suburban business park either. They like to live in a more exciting, interesting place. Okay, so what are we going to do? What are we, all of us in this room, going to do over the next 10 or 20 years to make that a reality? I think it's got to go way beyond, you know, what we're talking about. There has to be some mechanism, and I don't know, you know, I'm not king, or, you know, so I don't know how to do it, but somehow we have to get the three counties working truly together, you know, to address, you know, it's all about money. It's all about the economic reality of the next you know, 20 years, and I don't think it's the same as what the last 20 years were like. I think everything's changed. This recession, this housing bubble, it changed everything. The way development gets done, all those big master plan communities that we saw, you know, like Weston's and Parkland, you know, WCI's in Broward County, that stuff's over, okay? We have to figure out how to remake what we've got, okay? So it's about, and I think the key is all the public, you know, Greg, you know, he said, all the billions of dollars that are coming in, okay, how do we spend that money? You know, how do we spend it? Are we going to spend it to make the coastline, you know, the jewel that it should be? Or is it, or 20 years from now, is it going to look more like it did today than what I think, you know, it could be? So anyway, there you go.
Good. Thank you, Tim.
think we can open it up.
Sure.
And for sure, the people that are here
Yeah.
from our international attendees,
Yes.
we really like to hear your voices because this is a global local workshop. And we'd like to hear your input. But you won't be here to help us supervision
Okay.
when we leave. So,
Yep.
again, if you'd identify, and then John will take the mic, and I guess we'll go
Okay.
right there.
Sure. Before we open to the room, I'd just like to make a comment. As a neophyte entrant into this community, I think what you're talking about really is about connectivity and linkages at various levels, politically, socially, culturally, physically, and systemically. And I think finding how to make this connectivity work region-wide and statewide, I think is the issue. And I think ambition is important because by visioning, you're beginning to have ambition. I think we should think great and think big and make this what you intend to do to be what Elizabeth Moss from Harvard calls best in the world. I think that's what we should want to do. I'd like to open to comments from the audience. Yes, sir, over there.
Hi, Ken. I really appreciate the sharing for the three and whole panel here. I just want to say something about, there are a lot of things like science. We know we can even measure the inches of water, and we will deal with it. It's onerous, but we'll deal with it. We can describe it. But when it comes to, say, community, we tend to gloss away with a word. We think we know what community is. So, and then the danger is also that there was a critique that like pattern language cannot be applied all over the world. But then what are the patterns here that work in Florida, for community? What housing type, whatever it is, or town. For instance, the discussion of Richard, Florida is interesting. I mean, I was a consultant to advise the Singapore government to house 35,000 people, a new creative hub in Singapore, for all the international people to be attracted, to be there, to be vitalized, and also to be sustained, right? And so the issue of Richard Florida's thinking also must be dealt with. The issue of third ecology beyond what we call biological ecology, beyond the built environment ecology, social ecology, And so I would like to really sort of urge the whole panel, the whole group, to think carefully as to what social patterns really work here. Social patterns that work with physical design, not just nostalgic, historic, the palimpsests of meaning in life, which we will identify with, but how about the everyday, living? How do people relate? How do people really form communities? It's not just through the internet, because face-to-face meeting is very important. So all this, there are many studies overseas. Well, Singapore is a laboratory of 40 over years of high-density housing, of transport, of mass movement, of whatever, of water. Water has always been an issue in Singapore, but still they crack their head and ask, what's community? How to deal with density, right? So I think the issue of density will hit Florida, that's for sure. But nobody has discussed that today.
Thanks
All right?
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. The young lady here.
Yeah, hold on.
Sorry.
I would like to introduce a more local perspective for a moment, and even in this august body talking about all these regional and sustainable and even global trends, bring it back down to the local level of a small civic association. And it has been my observation that it's the daily battles that communities fight over the local traffic light, over the local development, over the local shopping center, that these are the battles that shape communities' perceptions of growth. Now, they can conceptualize and understand and even appreciate sustainability, regionalism, smart growth, and all of these things, but it's the day-to-day battles that form their impression of whether they're in control of their fate or whether they're not in control of their fate. And that's what puts the foot on the brake. That's what they make the community people put their foot on the brake, because they don't feel that they have control over these bigger issues, and that the bigger issues are not the issues that shape their their lives. It's the small battles, it's the political battles, it's the taxes, it's the stress of life, it's the too many traffic, too many cars down your street, et cetera, et cetera. How do we address that? How do we get inspiration to people to make them understand and appreciate the bigger picture? And I've had one foot in the community camp, and I have one foot in this camp, and I'm struggling with trying to reconcile the going forward and making progress and getting results with the day-to-day realities of the issues that we face. And until we can find some way to change that dynamic, I don't think we're going anywhere with this. I think that the dolphins is going to be the issue that everybody cares about, and not these issues. So if you've got some ideas on that, I
have a quick one. You know, as a developer who's down in the trenches fighting those wars all the time, you know, I think ultimately what you have to have, it's fairly simple. You have to have elected officials that don't care about getting reelected. Because if they don't, then they'll do the right thing. And you know what? The reality is you're always going to have neighbors. There's always going to be naysayers. Usually there's a small number that have a disproportionate, you know, volume level to the people who either don't care or do care but are just not quite as vocal about it. And you know what? Every voice should be heard, because that's how you get better decisions. But ultimately somebody's got to stand up and say, you know, whether it's Fort Lauderdale, whether it's Coral Springs, whether it's Palm Beach Gardens, or whether it's Hialeah, you know, you've got to make a decision and say, look, I'm going to do what's in the best, you know, long-term interests of the community. And if that means I'm not getting reelected, that's the way it goes.
I agree.
Sure, go ahead.
I agree with Tim. I think, you know, I clearly, you know, mentioned that I think we need public awareness and public support, but you also have to be careful, because if you give, you know, you want public support, but you don't want too much public control, because in the end you may be developing something that you don't want. And so I think, you know, having input is important, but.
Can I respond to that? That's not the answer. That's not the answer I wanted to get. That was really not the answer because that's the answer we always get.
Sure. Okay. Sandra has a comment.
One second. I think what I'm trying to describe is a balance, because you can't have. Well, I don't think you want a Joe accountant designing the next city block.
Yeah, but Joe accountant is paying the taxes that will go to providing the infrastructure and all of that.
So of course, we need Joe accountant's support.
And let's not say Joe accountant. That is incredibly elitist on your part, and it bespeaks what's going on here, and to some extent. But there are people who have genuine interest in sustainability and the ecology, and I see them every time at meetings, and they're always talking about these things. But when it comes down to how much more money are we going to pay on our sewer taxes to accommodate improved stormwater drainage so that we don't all drown in the next couple of years, it all comes down to, well, why should I pay more when the businesses aren't paying or the millionaires aren't paying? It all comes down to an allocation of resources in many respects. And I think that it's important that when we have these discussions, and we should have these discussions, it's wonderful, I've enjoyed it tremendously, we still have to remember that when it comes down to implementing the things that we all want to implement, it's the people who are living in the communities, who are paying the taxes, they're the ones that have to be moved to want to do this, and they have to have a greater sense of the fairness and equity of the distribution of resources and burdens. Otherwise, they will not do any of this.
I think, sorry, Sandra, do you want to say anything? All right.
Hi, thank you. My name is Michael Mathis. I've been living in this community for almost 30 years as an architect, but now I'm an urban farmer. I've raised a family here, and I spent the first 27 years of my life in Boston, Massachusetts. So I've had an opportunity to see a variety of social patterns, and I've determined that those social patterns are really set by foundations such as our physical conditions. The plat that was established here by Henry Flagler, that has set a big part of our social pattern because the blocks are small, the streets are small, and it makes growth very difficult. The patterns that are set by our electoral process in this county, we have a charter that requires that all the city comp plans go through the county. We have talked about electoral positions earlier, and that if they weren't worried about getting reelected, we might have a more positive result. If they acted more like statesmen than politicians, they would put their ambitions aside and look at the community. The way the community speaks is by election. And we have a very poor sort of distribution of that electoral group. The county commissioners have learned that they can go out to large populations of elderly and get elected without really worrying about people like myself who work and have a family. So that has put a lot of direction as to how the social patterns have developed. So my question is, how do we fix these foundations of the plat and our electoral process to allow the connectivity, the regionalism, the participation of the community to actually be heard and work? So I think this is really how our social patterns have been developed. If you look at a city like Boston, when the Pilgrims came, they planned the Common Garden, the Public Garden. These are places that we learned about in elementary school that brought the community together from the beginning. When we planned this area, it was set up for a railroad, perhaps a hotel in the future, things like that. There was no public garden. There was no common area like that. So I think those are some of the things we need to address, and my question is, how would we address those?
Would anybody, any member of the panel like to comment on that? Okay, sure.
I want to start. I think this also addresses the very first point that you made also on individual projects. What you need to do is you need to first understand what the regional issues are. It's not going to do you any good to look at a little tiny piece of land or a lot or a block or something and say this is what we're going to do here when that's going to be underwater 50 years from now or something like that. Having a solid foundation of what the regional issues are, what's going to occur with climate change, what the influx of climate refugees is going to be, and then the migration internally of people within this regional area, folks that may be moving from southwest Dade County that may be having to move inland, or western Broward County. Having that solid foundation of what those parameters are, and then establishing your vision. You can't move forward with long-range plans and a stability and a sustainable plan unless you have a vision and have that vision based on what a good solid foundation. If you're just looking at tomorrow, if you're looking at the placement of one mall, as you mentioned, without understanding these regional issues, without understanding what your vision is, you can't have your marching orders to implement that effectively if you don't know what your vision is. So I think it's very, very critical to establish your foundation and then establish your vision. What do you want for sustainable, livable communities? We're going to have density. That's...
Foundation I'm talking about is the pattern of streets that make up a sense of place, a concept that people can buy into directly. Yes, all those regional issues and connectivity and vision are absolutely right. You need to have those things. But first, in order to get the population, the individuals to buy in, we have to be able to get them to the polls to vote. Exactly. We have to also begin to get them to recognize that their place where they live can be something that they can respect and enjoy, and then have a community relationship with their other people. But our patterns on the ground are preventing that. Well, our electoral process is preventing that. So yes, all those other things will come once we can sort of break that knot that's holding us all back, which is getting our communication, our community together. And you can't be a strong community by just outreaching to the entire region. We sort of have to get, when you're setting up a network, you establish hubs, then you reach out to your peers, and then you can get into a much larger internet. But until you actually have some of those elements in place, trying to connect to the internet doesn't do you any good. So we have to really start with some of these peer conditions before we go into the
Lady was talking about money and resources. Would the developer like to comment on this? Could the developer contribute towards this community spending?
I think he's on the
Tim.
internet.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, if you could stop sending a notes to Elizabeth
I will.
Hurley.
I sorry.
Go ahead.
Answer the question again.
Well, I think the time has come and gone. I think.
All right.
Let's have another comment from somebody else.
What was the answer?
can developers contribute to land?
Good afternoon.
and so on?
Morning.
Oh, yeah, we do.
Yeah.
I think it's terrific that we have so much expertise in this room and interest. I noticed that our City Commissioner, Bruce Roberts, who I think has a vision, is here. He went to the trouble to be here. How do we get FAU, University of Miami, University of Florida, the architectural associations, the people that are 30, 40, 50 years old that are going to be here for a while, how do we get you to influence what's going on at City Hall so we're not so developer-driven or lobbyist-driven or politically driven, and the end result is we're 25 years past the 1985 plan, and what's going to get done is going to be lobbyist-driven instead of figuring out what do we want to do with the 30.5 acres that's on the intercoastal on the beach that belongs to the city. What should go where? How should it connect? You can't even, connectivity and linkage, good words. But you can't even ride a bicycle safely from here to the beach or back. You should be able to ride a bicycle from here to Palm Beach or South Point, which is a fantastic park that's at the south end of Miami Beach. So how do you keep this going, and how do you influence the outcome? I mean, it's about 3 out of 5 votes at City Hall when it really get all is said and done.
If I may comment, for the AIA, we've participated in the national, state, grassroots legislative day, and when we get in, the trenches and try and pull these issues to the forefront. But I think your point is well taken. Locally, it's very important, and we're going through a kind of almost a rebirth cycle in our AIA right now, and activities on the rise. And one of the committees we've started is a local government committee. And I think your point is well taken, and I think everyone needs to get in there and make their point clear of what our needs are as a community.
Please talk to Bruce Roberts after the
I'd point out the maps on the wall as the beginning point of what the university can do and what this college can do, because they describe, if you get a chance to look at them, the conditions of downtown Fort Lauderdale, and getting that communicated. The image on those maps is different from the image in most people's minds, and getting that information to decision makers is one thing that universities don't do well enough.
Thank you. There's a lady down there.
Hello, everyone. My name's Rosemary Kennedy. I'm actually the co-chair of the Subtropical Cities 2011 conference, and I just want to comment that everything that I've been hearing so far probably resonates really strongly with all of my colleagues here from the other side of the Pacific as well, because the conversation is so similar to what's going on there in terms of planning for the future. But I just want to, if I can, bring this conversation a little bit back to the visioning that we started with Bernard talking about, and with Ken as well, but also to give a little bit more of a sort of a local parallel, particularly regarding recent major flooding event in southeast Queensland. We had a similar flooding event in 1974, only 36 years ago. But when... Is this turned off? Oh, too close? But when it occurred again just last month, or actually mid-January, people were shocked. People were really shocked that this disaster had happened and come to their city, or come to our city. Literally, really only 3 to 4% of homes in the city were affected. But within those 3 to 4% of homes, there were a series of individual disasters and individual tragedies. But compared to 1974, that actually, it was actually double the amount of property damage. It's good? Okay. Okay, so the amount of destruction and damage to property actually was, I think it was more than double what happened in 1974. And in between 1974 and 2011, there had been some major mitigation measures put in place, including the building of a massive dam called the Ivanhoe Dam that was supposed to save Brisbane from flooding again. Ivanhoe Dam, anecdotally, and I'm not a water expert, was at 200% capacity. So the flood pocket that was actually meant to save us from flooding was actually used up. And we also had stormwater backing up and so on and so forth. So in some parts of the city, in my suburb, the water depth was something like 5 to 7 metres. So our houses that's also a traditional suburb, so the houses that were constructed there in the traditional way on stilts to take into account the topography, that didn't matter, just went over the roof. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, we put these mitigation measures in place, but in the meantime, our rapid rate of growth means that many more people were in the path of the flood. And the thing is really then, so I mentioned we were shocked. People seem to have short memories or thought that we were at less risk. And lifestyle, Bob Swindell mentioned earlier about all of the things that draw people to a great place. And we certainly share that wonderful lifestyle with a great connection to nature and beautiful vegetation, wonderful climate and so on. But in just about every case, the view is the thing that takes precedence. The view is the thing that that people seem to value most. And it seems to me that insurance companies, the property market, all sorts of things, you know, the normal way that we do things have been really exposed in this situation. There will be other people here who know more about how Brisbane is reacting now more than I do, but you know, I have a terrible feeling that just like in this room, that it's pretty much going to be more business as usual. I wish I could be a little bit more optimistic.
Great,
than
thanks
that.
very much. Could we get comments from anybody else in the audience? How about the gentleman over there?
Good morning. My name's Matt Newland. I'm from Brisbane.
Yeah. Brisbane, Australia.
My name's Matt Doolan. I'm from Brisbane, Australia, and I've had a great time here at this conference, and I thank you for hosting me here. I've been staying out on the beach and at a hotel that's about probably 4 or 5 kilometres from here, maybe 2.5 mile, and every evening I've been walking home along Las Olas and along the waterfront. And if I could just share with you a couple of my observations as I walk home each evening. I pass along Las Olas, and I see that it's a typical sort of strip mall where you've got to, if you want to go to one shop or the next, you're going to have to get back in your car. And perhaps there could be some more centric development that could improve that. I then pass along the waterway area. I see those huge boats, those massive boats that must be worth millions of dollars, and the waterways that they're on, but there's very little connectivity with the waterways. There's no public parks or access to it. It's all either roads along the waterways or it's private housing on the waterways. So maybe there's an opportunity to connect more, as some of the speakers here today have said, with public space, green space and the blue space. I then pass over the bridge as I approach the water, and I see that that, of course, is a barrier, and I'm not sure how you would solve that if you're going to build this light rail network and passing over that bridge. That's probably a question for an engineer. I then walk up along the beach and along that highway, and I see that beautiful beach that is such an asset to you, with this ugly highway built right on it, dividing all the people from the beach. And it's a massive barrier. Maybe something can be done there to divert the highway away from that area. Maybe there needs to be some light rail up along that beach, taking people along the beachfront. Maybe you need to look at ways of connecting with that body of water, as well as perhaps the intercoastal as well. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Hey, I have to make a comment. I mean, I'm a resident of Fort Lauderdale, and are you advocating that we should do like the Galt Ocean Mile with all the condos on the east side of A1A? I think A1A is done great, to be honest with you. I mean, you have the buildings on the opposite side, and you've left the whole beachfront open to the public. That's the way it should be. I mean, that's the model of Daniel Burnham in Chicago. I mean, that's the way it should be done. I totally agree with the comment about more use of all the canal system. And if you want to see really bad, go to Palm Beach County and see that you can't even get to any of the waterways at all. But absolutely, more green, more blue interconnectivity. That makes a lot of sense. But A1A, I totally disagree with that comment.
Okay, good. Anybody else? Over there. The gentleman over there.
Good morning. Is it on? Oh, there it is. I'm Gene Zelmer. I'm from California, and I really have been inspired by this conference. I think one of the things I encourage you to think about is I think we're at a really almost magical time in history, if you think about it. We have developed cities with streets and patterns that have for thousands of years. And here we're at this point with incredible new technology. We have all this new enthusiasm that we see expressed here by everyone. And I'm thinking maybe it's a good time to step back and say, can we totally reinvent maybe the way we do towns, the way we think about individual homes? Maybe there's a totally new way. And so that was a decision that I came to some 20 years ago, and I closed my practice to do this research. I have these flyers that I would like to put on the back table. I think that in the discussions, if you have, I would throw my concept on the table or in the center of the arena for one as a, not just words or concepts, but a real proposal that could be built today with the same cost as what we do suburbia, and put it out there as something you can rip apart and argue and see if there's better alternatives or way of changing it to make it fit your purpose. So I will put this back. I do have a 4.5-minute PowerPoint that I presented yesterday, and there was not very much attendance, so I didn't get the kind of reaction and debate that I had hoped for. So with that, I put that on the table.
Good, thank you. Anybody else? Lady over there.
Thank you. You didn't. I don't think you were pointing to me, but okay.
Never mind.
I am a former commissioner in the city of Fort Lauderdale, as Tim, and I'm also on the visioning committee. And I want to bring this back down to Fort Lauderdale and the visioning committee and the vision for this city. All of these ideas are fantastic. It makes people think about not just my street, as I guess the lady left, but not just my street, but all of the other issues that are out there in the region, in the city, and in the neighborhood. And it also shows that we have to work as a region. But what the visioning committee, I hope, is that we're thinking that the community has to be brought into this visioning process right from the beginning. That's how you get buy-in. Elected officials lead when the community is behind them. Otherwise, they're scared. So it's important that when we sit down together and do this together with the consultant, with the experts, with the universities, that everybody is sitting at the table and everybody has a chance to say, this is what I see, this is what I didn't realize about what's happening with the seawater, this is what I didn't understand about the region, but now that I see all of this laid out in front of me, let's work out a compromise and a vision that we can all, adhere to. And that's how you get buy-in, and that's how you get the progress that you want for the city. We don't want to keep a brake on this city. We want to move ahead, but the people who live in the city have to be with us. We can't do it just the people who understand us. The 10 of us who figure it out that, oh yeah, we need to have this happen. We need the people behind us to do it too. I just wanted to.
Good, thank you. Good. Some lady over there on the left-hand side.
Hello. Hello. You can hear me okay? Yes, okay. I actually live in Fort Lauderdale, and as I listen to this, obviously I'm very engaged in where I live and sustainability, which is what I'm all about. If nothing else we've learned from this, that the solutions come, and maybe it's a regional that we understand we need to work together, but the solutions come at a local level. It becomes very, very specific, down to even the quality of the soil on our property has an impact. So when we look at this, Nancy Gassman talked about how in Fort Lauderdale, our CO2 emissions from cars is 55%. We have a very real, simple solution that could be you put up a no idling sign at all our bridges that go up and down. I've timed it, they go 5 to 8 minutes. That alone might be a very simple way to reduce that number. We need to start looking at that, as well as we also need to start becoming examples and become leaders, and you need to engage the community to also become leaders. So like I'm in this room is too cold. I watch people shivering. This is leadership. We need to do that. As much as when we ate our box lunches, there were recycle bins. There's 130 to 140 people who attended this conference, and I actually asked for the sun chips to use them to help fund a project that I'm doing through TerraCycle. I got 3 bags. If we are to actually make this move forward, we actually need to become the leaders and set the example and allow others to join us. We're not going to lecture them, but we need to show them how to do this. We're all experts in here. I'm amazed at the amount of information, the expertise, the quality of information that's been shared. We should be doing this.
Thank you. Anybody else in the audience?
Good morning. My name is Oliver Scardo, and I'm a student at FAU. I'm also on the Green Living Task Force for the City of Boca Raton. A lot of the panelists talked about issues of regionalism connectivity in relation to issues of transportation and transit. I arrived at this workshop at 10:30, ironically, because the 807 train in Boca was canceled. The 837 train did not allow bikes because it was overcrowded, and the 937 train was 15 minutes late. I could have taken the express bus, but that starts at Sample Road, and I live off Glades Road in Boca, so that takes 2 connections, and then you have to bike a little bit more in order to get to that express bus. So that would have taken even longer time than the train issue. So I thank the panelists for drawing issues to issues of transportation. One of them said there's not a lot of people who take public transit. At least there's me, one. So hopefully, oh, you're too good. Bike, okay. So yeah, hopefully, I think this is an issue that it's a precondition in order for South Florida to fully function as an integrated region. So thank you for drawing attention to the issue.
Thank you. Would any member of the panelists like to say a few things?
Sure, I will.
Sure, okay. Here you are.
Thank you. I just wanted to say a couple things because I heard a lot of different points out here, and I'm not trying to sit here and just tout our group, the USGBC. But we do have local meetings. We have a local Broward Ranch. We talk about all of these issues. We talk about transportation. We had a meeting in Broward last year that brought up the South Florida Bike Coalition along with FDOT, put them at the same table,
and they talked about how the bicycles were or were not connected. We're starting to think about these issues on a higher level. We talk about it every month. We bring up everything from urban agriculture to the buildings. We have tours of green buildings. We have tours of farms, urban agriculture, and we tend to talk about this on a monthly basis. We also have about 10 or 15 committees per branch. And within our region, we're going up to, not lobby, but go up to advocates. We have a legislative day at the end of this month, and we meet with our legislators to talk about everything from our Green Schools Caucus to how we can affect, we had a PACE initiative in the state, and we have an alternative to it that was set up in St. Lucie County. Our Commissioner, Doug Coward from St. Lucie County, is going to show all of the legislators in Tallahassee how he set this up and how it works, so we can have an alternative to a lending institution at a 4% interest rate to help people move forward more quickly and get hurricane hardening and energy efficiency in every building, commercial or residential. So there is a monthly basis that you can talk about it. One of the avenues is our group, the U.S. Green Building Council, but any of the people sitting at the table, we all have community forums, we all have meetings, and we are working towards this, but we are volunteering to help with this legacy committee. We're committed to it. And again, I'm just saying, we do this on a volunteer basis. I've been doing this for about 8 years. And we're not going anywhere. We're here to help. And anything we can do to get the word out from all of the talent in the room at the table and the passion of the people in the audience. I have the same passion. We want to get the word out and connect the people and to the right answers. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert. Well, we've got another 10 more minutes. Is anybody else? Or have you run out of steam already? Gentleman over there. Yes.
Well, I have sat and heard this discussion about the wonderful things that we should or shouldn't be doing vis-a-vis connectivity and putting the regionalization in play. But I sit here thinking about the human cost. I think of 400,000 people driving south, 200,000 going north, tens of thousands of homes situated within blocks of the highways, hospitals on highways. And I asked myself, thinking Alvin Toffler wrote that wonderful book, Future Shock, some decades ago, that described what communities would be like today. 42 years ago, I arrived in this country on my way to actually Miami, which is a different place then, on my way to University of California. And the kid I was then had all the dreams of what tomorrow would look like. Well, this is the tomorrow I was dreaming of. And it's certainly a far cry from what we thought then. I look at the community today, and I've been in and around South Florida for about 25 years, and everything that we should not have done, we have done. And yet we continue on the same motion with the same dogma, new tires, driving the same old process, and wonder why Einstein thought that we keep doing the same thing, but somehow, in this case, we plan to get a different result. And nowhere along the way have I this morning heard of a planning process or a thought process that says, on this, the idea of regionalization and the human cost, the health costs that are forthwith, as we think of the exposure to the toxins that we are artificially putting in the region, nowhere in it am I hearing the discussion for really let's get back and reconsider what we're doing, and not just a continuous extension of it, because this is not sustainable. And no matter how much we believe that we can just tweak it, it's going to change. I don't know where that's going to come from. And I see so many children today who are already manifesting the problems. Forget about us adults who already have all the toxins in us and the health consequences. The future bills await us, and yet we are still not describing the future with that clarity of a real vision of tomorrow, as opposed to carrying the balls and chains of two centuries before. So I leave that to you great minds in planning and design, but the evidence doesn't suggest that we've really been very successful, and I'm not sure that we are ready to let go of that legacy to bring the future that we really need, that will take us to the future.
Thank you. Maybe the answer is leadership.
Yeah.
Could we just have somebody else?
Dan, I think
yes.
what we'd like to do at this point is if everyone would join me in thanking Ken and his panel for participating. And remember, Ken is our plenary speaker later this afternoon, and I know that Tony Abadi, who's now going to give us some closing remarks and as it relates to the conference and everything else that's going on. Please welcome Tony Abadi.
First of all, I want to thank Jim Murley for organizing this legacy project, and thank you, Ken Yeang, and all of the panelists for participating. It's been a very, I believe, a very useful discussion, and I think that as chair, and along with my co-chair Rosemary Kennedy from Brisbane, Australia, this is actually the first time that the Subtropical Cities Conference, which has met every 2 years for the past 6 years, has extended the conference to the local community and actually invited the local community. We've invited everybody, including the Building a Better Fort Lauderdale group, the blogs. We really wanted to get a cross-section of the community together with a cross-section of the global community because, quite frankly, I want to share with you the last few days of the conference. And I think that this is my opportunity to sort of share that with you and let you all know that our keynote speakers have been videotaped, and all of these keynotes will be available online for you to view. The proceedings of this morning will be published along with the proceedings of the conference for you to dig into and continue to work, and I'm encouraged by the president of USGBC, who's committed to volunteer to help us along this path. I also want to encourage our students and the young residents and young professionals in the community to be engaged, to continue this conversation, because you are the future. We put this conference on for you. This is our legacy. We've arrived at the last day, and I'd like to thank our conference committee and the College for Design and Social Inquiry for agreeing to host this legacy workshop as an active manifestation of the rich exchange that has occurred over the past few days. For the benefit of everyone here, and in particular the local citizens and community leaders, I'd like to recap the running theme of the conference as it's expressed through our keynotes and very rapidly run through this. But I think every keynote had a message, and it's all woven together, at least in my mind. And I invite you to hear our closing keynote, Dr. Ken Yeang, who will speak this afternoon at 4 o'clock at the library, again, free and open to the public, followed by a reception at College Plaza hosted by our dean for the College of Social Design and Social Inquiry. On Tuesday, we heard from John Todd, a pioneer in the field of ecological design and engineering, who inspired us, really. He inspired us because he showed us the capacity of human intelligence, the capacity for us to heal and regenerate living systems. His work was not only inspiring, but set the tone for the conference, striking a very optimistic note. He was able to actually transform raw sewage in major cities in China, as well as heavy metal ponds in Massachusetts, transform these ponds using living systems, living machines, applying design knowledge, design thinking to solve real problems that we all face. So I thought that was a very inspirational start. The second presentation by Peter Richards, who's an adjunct professor at the Center for Subtropical Design at QUT, reminded us that design is about a set of rules. I'm sorry, that design is not about a set of rules that produce automatic results, but rather, yeah, Peter, you're sitting right there. Rather, it's about a cultural and community engagement with place and a generative force. In other words, by using his examples that he showed us of urban infrastructure that are carefully considered and designed, these are capable of generating new and sustainable forms of urbanity. Bruno Stagno, founder and director of the Institute for Tropical Architecture, who's also sitting in the audience here, reminded us of the power of the shade in subtropical and tropical cities as contrasted with the sunny spaces that we all sort of tend to think of when we think of plazas and urban spaces. And he also introduced a few new words to our vocabulary, one of them Spanish, floresta urbana, which is a word that can't be translated literally. And this is one of the beauties of a cross-disciplinary international conference. The word floresta urbana means urban forest. It also means a delightful rural place. And it also means a collection of fine things that are pleasing to the taste. So what a wonderful concept. He described how his country, Costa Rica, has declared peace with nature, and based on that embarked on a plan to achieve carbon neutrality in the next 15 years. This should serve as an inspiration to us locally and internationally. We also heard from Andres Douani, who most of you know from Miami, whose experiences in post-Katrina New Orleans and Haiti exposed cultural nuances and the contradictory and counterproductive effects of what he described as the nanny state in affecting meaningful innovation and change across social and economic sectors, in particular the poor and disenfranchised. His talk for me was essentially a provocation, a call to action for the design community to sit at the table and apply their knowledge and skills to solve the complex problems that are not solvable without design thinking, linked to economic and social realities of our populations and our communities. Yesterday we heard from Guy Nordenson, a structural engineer and professor of structural engineering and architecture at Princeton, whose work in the Upper Bay of New York, New Jersey managed to bridge across scientific, engineering, and design communities along with the local communities to actually build a very powerful and beautiful scheme to manage the effects of sea level rise in Manhattan and the surrounding areas with a focus on water as a place and how we can adaptively design our cities to deal with water without massive defensive structures. And later today we're going to hear from Dr. Yeang again, who has honored our faculty and students here with his remarks this morning, and who will most certainly inspire us all as we close this conference and return to our communities around the subtropical world with a clearer sense of purpose and a renewed optimism about the power of design thinking to transform our world to a better place, not just for us, but with a deeper understanding of the different ecologies that we live among. This interdependent nature of our lives and our abilities to design under the premise, really, of survival for mutual gain. Now, this idea of survival for mutual gain is at the core of this notion, this discussion, this argument about regionalism. We have to begin to understand that it's for our mutual gain, our very survival. So I invite you back at 4 p.m. to the main library to hear Ken Yeang and to the reception. For conference delegates, a quick reminder that our closing plenary will take place at 3. I know a number of you have had problems getting access to our wiki site. We're developing a wiki site. We have a wiki site to develop a declaration of principles for subtropical urbanism. We're going to try to open that up earlier at 2 o'clock, so anyone wants to come early and actually participate in that making of the principles. And as I said, a video of these proceedings will be available to everyone, and I want to thank everyone who's participated. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We're adjourned. Thank you.